I bet you do that. Most people like the opposite. Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Welcome everyone. This is the Advisor Design Panel meeting for Thursday, May 16th, 2019. We'll start by acknowledging this meeting is held on the Squamish Nation traditional territory. The first item is an adoption of last week's agenda, or last meeting's agenda from May 16th. I have someone move. Second. Everyone in favor? Okay. The first business arising item is development permit 38935 Queensway. And sorry?
Adoption of the
agenda. Oh, just the agenda so far. Sorry. We need to adopt the minutes from the last meeting, which was April 18th, 2019. Has everyone reviewed those? Any questions on those at all? Any comments, changes? So move to adopt. Sarah? Seconded. All in favor? There we go. And first item of business is 38935 Queensway.
Good afternoon. My name is Naisby. I'm a planner with community planning at the District of Squamish. So this first item is a new industrial building on Queensway in the business park. It's located at 38935 Queensway. And so it's at the intersection of Queensway and a new municipal road that's going to provide access to the west. The zoning for the parcel is light industrial, so it's I1, which is the same zoning as the surrounding parcels. And so it is subject to 2 development permit areas. The first development permit area 2 is a flood hazard technical DP area that we're not asking ADP to review, but the other is the form and character development permit area number 9, industrial employment. So that's what we're seeking feedback from ADP on those guidelines. And so staff are generally supportive of the site plan, and we request ADP's feedback on it. So the objectives of development permit area 9 are to minimize the visual impact of industrial development on the public realm, as well as to ensure aesthetically attractive industrial employment. So yeah, we're seeking feedback generally on the site plan, architectural design, the building materials and finish, and the landscape. And to be a bit more specific, staff is really interested in ADP's feedback on the cladding of this building. So it's proposed to be clad in wood as well as a blackened steel wall panel. Also the site circulation, so the accessibility, pedestrians and cyclists, the location of the waste room, the building form and massing, and the signage and the lighting. So with that, I'll turn it over and I'll just introduce the team here. So we've got John Hewitt, who is the Lebeniste woodworking company that will be moving into this building. And then we've got the architects. We've got Alvin Martin and John Hemsworth from Hemsworth Architecture, and Julian Pattison with Considered Design Landscape. Thank you.
Yeah. So hi, I'm John. First off, I just want to say thanks to everybody for getting together and taking time in your day to come and check this out. So for us, this is obviously a really pretty exciting project. We're a small growing business that's been in Squamish for 10 years. And we have this sort of pretty unique, amazing opportunity to do this project. So we've been working, I guess in the last few years we've had the opportunity to work with some pretty talented building companies around the Sea Sky area. So we've been really grateful to have lots of opportunities and do that and to continue to grow our business that way. Through some of those relationships, we met with John and Alvin, who've done some pretty neat projects around the Sea Sky area. So been working with them on this particular project. I'm not quite sure what to say other than it's just like really exciting to be here with you guys, and thanks for taking a look at this.
So I'll take over. We thought it was important for John to introduce himself, being that, for a lot of these industrial buildings, they're not tenant purpose, right? Whereas this is a completely different approach. So we got to know John a little bit, and we're quite excited because we do have some experience on these kind of heavy mass timber buildings, industrial. We did the factory in Pemberton. But what was interesting also about kind of John's kind of vision for this is to, one, is have this purpose-built building, but also to create this kind of industrial hub space, right? This kind of shared kind of design, kind of collective of other people that could be attracted to this type of workspace, and we thought that was a really fascinating idea. So that was kind of the beginning of the process for us. Now you have our plans that were submitted. We've got like extra images here that kind of go through, kind of walk you through our process a bit, but we can answer questions directly about this as we go. We're kind of, we don't want to take too much time, so we'll try to go reasonably quick. Our first part of the process was to actually sit down with John and go through his actual process. And so what's interesting about this is that whereas some warehousing is just build everything, put it in the corner, and then build something else, and then put it in the corner, and then ship it all out. This is kind of more of a lean processing plant where he's bringing everything in. It gets picked up into one kind of beautiful, like going to be one beautiful like millwork piece, and it goes through the process. So I can't point to that one, but if you look at this one, so he's kind of has his loading, and he has an existing facility working here now already just up the street, but there's a combination of kind of CNC millworking that's kind of going on, and then kind of hand placing things, and then he's going back and forth between different parts where they're being finished and then test fitted and then back. It's quite a sculptural kind of interesting approach, so we were very fascinated. I know, yeah, I got it.
It only shows on the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the people who are looking at that one can't see.
Yeah, it's
okay. Thanks. So we were quite fascinated with this, but when we actually laid out all his space and his equipment and what he's kind of doing, it's going to take a lot of his site. So there was this balance between what we need for parking, what we need for this industrial space that he wants, for the shared space that he wants to create in the building, and how we're going to get his place out. We also thought it was a very fascinating process between watching the CNC stuff go on and then the kind of hand like craftsmanship and then back and forth. And so we had an idea of how we might express that in the building. So we'll get to that in a second. So basically our kind of floor plan is to kind of lay out a double height space here, which is where most of his work's going on with the kind of equipment, and it's all very purposely placed, like there's not a lot of extra room where he's kind of coming in. And we can talk about how that plays itself out on the site as we go along. And then we've got kind of some shared spaces in here, which are more, there's like for his kind of more specific storage, and then staff spaces and bike parking and all that kind of stuff, with the main stair now coming off the entry, kind of coming up. And then an elevator, freight elevator going up to the top to pick up the industrial spaces at the top. And then what was important is that John's actual workspace, because it's not just traditional millworking, it's CNC, it's computer modeling, it's all this kind of stuff going on, that he has a workspace that we've placed this in, so it has a direct visual relationship into the space of where the pieces are being created. So the staff are moving back and forth between the two things. And then there's another mezzanine at the back, which is where he's doing his veneering, because they're not just buying veneers from the rack, they're actually doing all their own veneering, which then kind of goes back in place. So it's really, for us, it was a fascinating process to learn how he's kind of going about it. And then at the top, we're looking at, well, if we're going to create this hub space, how do we fit it onto the site? Like this kind of shared space where different people would come to work and how they would find a kind of central place. And so instead of doing traditional where we put it on the ground floor, we actually looked at inverting the building and creating this kind of shared space for the inhabitants of the occupants of the building, with a small little cafe to support them, with a kind of indoor-outdoor kind of small space here. Only can seat 30 people, but it kind of creates this kind of, cross-pollination of all these different types of people doing similar work to what John's doing in their spaces at the top. But I can go through the plans in a little more detail. That was just kind of the broad strokes. So the site is just here along Queensway. This is the little new access road that's just been started here, which will open up into the rest of the industrial park. And so we thought we had a very interesting idea or opportunity here to call out the entry to this new industrial space, because there's nothing built there now. So we're kind of setting hopefully the tone. The site itself, this is that little access road kind of coming off Queensway along here with these views to the mountain at the back. Very flat site. but below the floodplain. So the project was really a balance between trying to get enough parking on site. There's 1.1 parking stalls required for 100 square meters of industrial space, and how we balance that out with kind of being able to fit John into the building, and at the same time create this kind of top floor, which is also going to be kind of an economic driver for the project. So we've basically moved the building to the front to give it a frontage along Queensway, and then pushed it back a little bit to kind of create an access spot. We've split the parking so that the kind of day-to-day workings of what's going on in and out of the shop, which I showed you in the first slide, is kind of happening back here, where we're also kind of tucked in his daily like waste and garbage there. And we've talked to the local supplier, GFL, about their kind of location and how much they need to pick up, and they were generally supportive of kind of the location. And then the kind of front entry of the building comes here. So we're going to kind of flip this. We're going to let Julian talk a little bit about the site, the landscaping, and then we'll go back and talk about the massing and form of the building.
So landscape architecture, there's kind of three main things to note really. We've deliberately kept the planting plan really quite simple, and that's to kind of mediate this idea of scale between this typology of kind of large shed-like buildings with something that's more human in scale. So what we want to do is essentially draw attention back to the building as opposed to being very fussy with the landscape. So the landscape is the mass planting of grasses along Queensway, and then the lavender at the front. Really kind of defines those two zones that John talked about earlier there. And then the tree planting is predominantly Swedish aspens, which give a verticality to this kind of otherwise very flat alluvial landscape in this area. So it's the whole idea is to give it some verticality in the parking lot. And I think that's really the kind of the dominant themes in the landscape architecture. Yeah, the mountain plan and the types of trees. The street trees, we're proposing Acer rubrums, Quercus balestris pin oaks. Along Queensway, they'll very much be dependent on the hydro lines, whether or not we bury the hydro lines. But the Quercus is a great street tree, and it supports a lot of habitat.
I think just a quick note, the amount of trees we have on Queensway is dictated by the existing hydro poles and lights and other features that are out there that we're kind of working around.
All sorts of other stuff going on in our little
Okay, thanks. We can kind of back to questions as we go. So basically our moves kind of to talk about the building itself kind of from a mass. Again, kind of red arrows are pushing the building to the front to give it a kind of a presence along Queensway, and then pushing it to the back so that there's this kind of corner that's kind of emphasizing the entry to the new industrial park. So it's kind of, the building has really two fronts to it. And what we're proposing is to cut out a glass wall on the front corner here and expose the kind of combination of John's CNC millworking going on, and then the craft of the kind of assembly at the front corner of it, which you can see in the plans. So that the scale, instead of having just a big blank wall along Queensway, we're actually kind of activating the street here, being able to show the actual, like, because it's purpose built, we know what's going to go in it. There's not just going to be like boxes, it's going to be actually John's work, moving the pieces back and forth as they kind of come through. The next piece is we were kind of, because we've kind of got this dual-faced building now, was to kind of find a way to emphasize the entry to the building. So as we're coming off the Queensway here, we're coming in, we're entering the site here, we've cut this away as glass too, which has the stair that's going up to the top. We've just gently taken that corner of the building and extruded it out to kind of create an overhang for the entry, but also to emphasize that this is kind of the entry of the building. And then when we get into the materiality, we'll look at how we've wrapped a piece of kind of steel with signage underneath us. So we've got a kind of covered space to create that kind of moment of entry into the building. And then what we've done is we've taken, again, based on the calculations for the parking of how much industrial space we can actually do, we can't fill the whole building. We just don't have enough parking spots to do it. So what we did is we did the calculation to actually push back this, so instead of just having a kind of a square piece, we've kind of pulled it back on an angle, and then this would create the views running all towards the mountain. So what we think is we've created this kind of little privileged privileged in the sense of its view, not in its access, but this place that you could come up to get a view across, so you're kind of looking not necessarily down on the buildings next to you, but kind of up and towards the mountains in the background. Creating this kind of, so the space that we're talking about here, this kind of industrial hub isn't just a kind of a hopeful kind of let's put something there and happen. We're actually trying to give it the nicest kind of space within the building.
It's actually something I forgot to mention. I was going to share this earlier. So part of the idea of this upper level space is like when we first sat down with John, we said, hey, look, like this is the vision. Like we obviously are going to use some space for ourselves, but we wanted to create, like, if you're driving down the Sea Sky Highway and you have like, we'd like for this place to be like the lighthouse of amazing design and manufacturing happening in the Sea Sky area. So we've been talking with some people, been talking with Kate Mulligan and some of the sort of the industrial development people, but would love to curate a community of people that are really doing some pretty interesting things in the design and manufacturing space. So that, you know, ultimately I'd love to have sitting upstairs in this cafe just a collection of really smart minds that are working on really, you know, great ideas sort of thing. So that's one of the things I really like about what these guys have created and proposed here is that there's sort of like you enter the building and there's this kind of really cool staircase that takes you up to the public space that's on the upper level. You kind of go up this neat staircase and there's, you know, a communal space where you can spend time and there's other people that are working on other really interesting things, and then you know, just a place that's the kind of collaboration that happens around there. So.
And so we're looking at, and then we'll get to the plans, so we're looking at kind of finishing the deck in an intensive kind of sedum kind of theme, so we're not extensive, sorry, I always get it wrong, I can't go on for me to remember which way it is. But basically, so that we're not sitting just on a roof with the kind of the hope that it's going to be nice on certain days, we're going to actually try to carry this. One of the other unique parts with this, we've done in purpose-built industrial wood buildings in the past, we haven't done a multiple floor one. And so because the zoning will not allow office space in here, so the top floor cannot be office space, it has to be industrial manufacturing space, is that the loading for the floors is actually twice what it would normally be. So the structure has gotten a bit beefier, so we can, we've had trouble before with green roofs, is kind of making sure we have enough structure. We have enough structure because we're going to have to carry this extra loading for these kind of future industrial spaces. Which gets us to the site section. So what, and this kind of, you can see this better in your drawing, I think. So then this is the double height factory space, the kind of entry, John's kind of workspace here looking down over to it, and then this is the industrial space at the top of the drawing. Because we're in the floodplain, we have to bring the floodplain construction level up almost a meter and a bit at along Queensway, and then a little less at the back because there's a natural slope to the site. What was interesting to us is we hadn't seen this before is that the building height calculations are being taken off of the center line of the road, not off the perimeter of your property. So we've done a couple. We're doing a project in North Van that's also kind of in the floodplain, and our floodplain calculations came from the four corners of the site, whereas this is actually coming from the road that's below the site. So the road's below the site, and then we're lifting the building up a little bit to get to the floodplain construction. And so what we're hoping for is support from your side today, because we're looking at just under 3 feet of height that we're going to need to add to the building based on the loss of that height from the top of the crown of the road to the floodplain, and then kind of emphasized by the fact that the structure of the building has gotten quite beefy because of this industrial use on the second floor. If it was an office space, it could be less, but there's no opportunity for office spaces here. It has to be industrial. So there is a request from our end of it to the calculation where we're going to be adding just under 3 feet of height taken from the middle of the road, but not taken from the building's, you know, its actual ground plane. So for the materiality, this is a project we did in Pemberton a number of years ago. It's clad, it's a similar in kind of construction and glulam beam and CLT wall panels and floor. This project was clad in fir and larch untreated 2x4s, and so it's kind of graded, it's kind of aged as per the requirement from the building owner. We've also done 2 other projects. I was the project architect and Alvin was the technical lead for Larry McFarland when we did the outdoor school, the Checkma Center here. This is a LEED Platinum building too, which is clad in cedar that we treated in a called Valcolo. It's a water-based preservative. So instead of taking wood and kind of painting it with Sigma or something, trying to kind of having to redo it, this changes the exterior structure of the wood. So the outdoor school was treated this is a house we did in Whistler a year and a half ago, treated the same way. So the wood itself becomes quite stable. There's no need for paint or upkeep. So the color of the elements we're putting around is the color of the final process. That's not actually the wood because it takes a while to kind of go through the process to get it there. We've been kind of come up with a dipping process that we've been using on a couple of projects to get that consistency in the color. If you put the stuff on, you can buy it at like Rona or the Home Depot. If you just put it on your fence, we originally found it was being used in Parks Canada was painting all their signs in it, so it goes silver. So it's a really easy way to get your wood to go silver. But if you kind of dip it, dry it, kind of turns into this walnut color, which we're like, excited about. And you can see, I don't know how old the outdoor school is now, 10 years old, and it still looks fantastic. So that's our approach to this building as well. And then we're using the blackened metal along the bottom edges, which we can show you in the elevations, just to kind of create a kind of more rugged material in the kind of closer to the ground plane. We're looking at a basic aluminum clad or clear anodized aluminum glazing system with kind of a dark flashing to kind of match the darkened, the blackened steel. So very, very simple palette, something that we think is going to be quite robust, even though it's kind of, so we've had this question before from planning about the use of the wood, and we're very confident that it's a stable and long-lasting material. So then this is the view now from Queensway. This is just an elevation, not perspective anymore. Because of this opportunity with these spaces on the top of the building, we wanted to register them on the front and break up that mass of the facade. So we'll have double lit spaces that are being rented up here, so they're going to have their east and west light coming into them. This is the extent of the glass wall on the ground floor, again showing John's kind of day-to-day operations inside, which, you know, I've got a background in engineering. I was just like, it's just like walking around like being in a candy store, all this stuff, and then they pull out these like incredibly beautiful sculpted pieces. It's been really like inspiring to get to know them a little bit more. And then we're finishing this piece with the blackened steel, so very simple control palette. Oops.
The screen.
Yeah, and then we're looking at kind of, we've done this a little bit in the past where the windows are fixed, of kind of carrying some of this cladding down over props. So at night we get this kind of lantern effect inside of the building. We did it in the house in Whistler. We did it also in the Pemberton project where we carried the screens around and then kind of pulled off some of the wood where there was views were more apparent, or where we kept it denser where we were worried about solar gain. This is the kind of front entry now coming in off the access road here, again pulling out that front piece a little bit just to create a moment of kind of entry into the building. But then it is an elevation, but as you approach the building you would actually see this grand stair that's kind of coming up to hit John's kind of workspaces, but then goes right up through the kind of shared space on the roof. The back wall, with this is be kind of facing other property due to the kind of building code restrictions. We're going to have to, we can't clad that in wood at this point without putting an alternate solution in it. So we're looking at then carrying the metal panel from the back, from the front side around to do the back, and then carry it back along the front, this kind of workspace here. We want to keep the wood a little bit away from the kind of day-to-day rain and toil and all that stuff that's kind of in snow that's going to happen on the ground level on this kind of more workspace side of the building. And you can see the glazing kind of opening to the view at the top. And then a kind of render from the kind of corner looking towards the new industrial park. So we're trying to find a balance in the building, again, kind of similar to kind of inspired by John, that there is, it's not just kind of craftsmanship, there's a kind of technology here. So we're trying to find a building kind of form that was a little bit more kind of I mean, we think it's subtle, but just a little bit more suggestive in its form making than kind of just a simple box, again, alluding to kind of elegance we've seen in John's work. And then just a really kind of quick, yesterday, kind of putting together what that kind of top kind of view might be like of this kind of space off the building. We'll have to work through a bit more of the kind of in and out details as we go. But this idea that this is the kind of place that kind of lands itself directly in Squamish, related to the mountains, related to the sense of being outdoors, related to the kind of type of people John's trying to attract to this building, so that there is a kind of this shared kind of collective kind of understanding of what they're doing, but also where you live. And then we can run through the plans if there's specific questions.
Thanks very much. Great presentation. We'll open to questions now. Would you like to start, Dennis?
Sure. What do you guys have a color for the glazing out front? Are you tinting it at all? Or?
No.
Okay.
No tint in the glazing. We use a kind of aluminum, kind of a clear anodized aluminum, so we're trying to make it as the rest of the building has a kind of heaviness, kind of a presence to it, and make the glazing as transparent as possible. So like no green tints or anything like that.
And for the upper deck, I just wonder about, I mean, it is an industrial area, but did you think about putting that on the Queensway side? Maybe to pick up a bit better view corridor and maybe a little bit of interaction with the public realm at all? Or was it, like, what was the move to put it in
So when we kind of looked at kind of how we were kind of laying this space out, and we've worked in the corridor quite a bit. What I find fascinating about this site is that it's kind of flat and kind of almost like if you, as you're a visitor here, you're kind of struck by this kind of range of mountains here, just along the back side of it. And so we thought as the sun's kind of coming across, later in the day, it would land on this side of the building, and we would create this kind of outdoor. We have to be careful of the wind a little bit up there, but creates this kind of sheltered space. Whereas the east side of it, I think becomes difficult. John originally wanted to put the kind of cafe sort of thing on the ground floor, right? It's kind of, because you get more in and out sort of thing. And so we've kind of worked through that opportunity. It's really tricky with his equipment and then the parking requirements. And so it wasn't our first intent to kind of put it on the roof, but as we kind of started to think about it, we thought it was a really nice idea. And from my end of it, I think that putting it on the kind of west side with that kind of end of day view and the mountain is worth it more than putting it on the east side, which would have less of kind of the solar. But I appreciate the comment about the public realm. It's also that the public realm is a bit different along Queensway than it would be here. We were also concerned that we didn't want to create it right on the edge of the building so that you're sitting there looking down onto what might not be as nice for the future builds. Who knows? So we kind of pushed it back a little bit from the edge so that and pulled that parapet up a little bit so that you're going to basically have a framed view of the mountain in the distance.
Okay. And the access road, maybe this is for planning, but this is just to access the sites behind? So it's a service road, basically?
That's right. It's not envisioned to go very far. I think the extent of it is shown there. Okay. So was there, in your site planning, was there any, did you look at pushing this to the corner more, or pushing the building north?
Closer to the access road, you mean?
Yeah, like framing it on that corner and putting the parking behind in between the other buildings?
And so the balance was, and this again, it's like kind of a little bit of a Rubik's Cube here based on the parking requirements. We wanted to separate the kind of John's kind of everyday people, like they have the kind of the queue vans coming back and forth, and then the visitors coming to the building and people kind of using that industrial space. And so if we put everything to the back, we also looked at trying to make a connection off of Queensway, which is particularly tricky. Because that might have worked to put the parking behind the building there and push it forward, but with the parking to the back now, we create a log jam, kind of people coming in and out of the building. So the intent was to split it so that the public parking, right, the visitor parking, or people kind of working on a daily basis in one of the industrial spaces would use the front part of it, which is similar to the way a lot of these buildings are laid out, right, where there's that kind of parking buffer in front of it. But we didn't want to do that to Queensway as well. Like we thought there was an opportunity for the building based on where it is in the entry to this new precinct actually have a stronger presence there. But to your point, I think cutting the glass around that corner there, so that there's, you can see in the view, so that we're actually making that have the presence on both faces of it. It's one of those double-faced buildings.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying. We played with a whole bunch of different options. At one point, we looked at kind of lifting the building up and putting the parking underneath, and a whole bunch of things. So this is kind of a balance of trying to balance those two faces, one more towards Queensway and one more towards this. Now, we're hopeful that the building across the street picks up the kind of the same sort of intent, so we're creating another road through, but we don't have any control over that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I had just the same sort of questions. Did you consider any other modulation along that Queensway facade?
We looked at stepping it, right, of pushing the piece back at the top. One of the issues, and then this is kind of the third design panel that we're talking about, is that the proportions of the building are kind of tricky, right? Because we definitely didn't want like a 3-story wall along Queensway. It was too much. But what we did is we actually extruded the. Oh yeah, there you go. We kind of extruded this piece over here a bit more. We built a series of physical study models to kind of get it. And then by kind of cutting the glazing along the top here, along this side, we think that there's a kind of enough modulation both of the use along Queensway and also the kind of lighting at night kind of along that piece. I think will be quite nice. It's really an interesting process here because on the first take of it, you're like, Queensway should have all the parking in front of it like some of the other ones we've done. But I thought that there was more of an opportunity to actually create something kind of meaningful along the street. And then with Julian's kind of light hand as far as the kind of the planting fund, that we've created a nice kind of public realm that's better in my mind than just kind of coming up and walking across another parking lot. So it's definitely a different approach as far as it goes, but we really kind of tried to find something that would both benefit kind of John and his kind of use, the visitors to the building, and also kind of leave a presence, make a positive on the building. So that's our interpretation of it.
Okay. And is signage just limited to the adjacent to the entry there? There's no other signage on the building?
No, there's you think you'll see it on your site plan. We haven't highlighted that much, but there's a basalt stone slab at the entranceway off of the access road. When you pull into the driveway, it's on the bottom part of the driveway coming in there. So I don't have the plans.
Here, take a look at this.
Go to the site plan. Which this sign at the, oh no, you have to go up to the site plan that we had farther into the notion is that basalt slab will be lit and it'll have the sign for the building proper signage,
right.
And then it's right here. So there's between the sidewalk and the driveway, there'll be a sign there that'll be visible for everybody coming into the building and lit at night. And then when you come into the building, against this wall here near the public entrance, which is you'll see on the renderings, is a black and steel wall. We'll have all the tenants' names listed and lit so that you know where you're supposed to go within the building. Okay. And there's not that many tenants in the building, so it's fairly easy to kind of make them prominent.
Our idea of kind of signing, we did the same thing with Pemberton, was that the building itself just kind of stands out enough that it's kind of an interesting kind of, all wood construction wood clad, that it becomes a bit of an easy building to find in the sense of what you're looking for. But the signage itself can be, I think it's a separate DP for this, or does that be part of this? Yeah.
And roughly how many people are you expecting to work in this building? My question's related to bike sort of racks.
From our side of things, like when we are in here, I would expect we'll be about 35 or 37 people in our team. And then hard to say for what other businesses might be on the other levels. Yeah.
Did you consider any more bike parking outside?
We have there's 10 bike spots outside for visitors just coming and going, and then we've got individual bike racks that we'll install within each leasable space, so and we can put as many there as
and there's the freight elevator. It's not just a passenger elevator, it's actually a freight size elevator, which is connecting the two spaces. If you look at the plans,
And we've got some extra secure bikes parking on the lower floor for his staff as well, where they have their separate staff entry.
Okay.
So
it's really
we tried to
just
stretch it
access.
beyond because we know
There's an
lots of
alcove that's planned for our team. We want quite a few of our team ride bikes and things like that. So it's, there's a specific spot for that.
Yeah, I think we have 8 spots there for your
Just
staff.
So this is, so there's
And then
a,
2 in each of the spaces up above.
so there's entry, his staff entry kind of coming in here sort of thing. We've got a kind of the more of the public entry with the glazed kind of connection here. So again, you're seeing the kind of work going on with the stair kind of coming up. His workspace is here, and then the industrial spaces, which again could have their own parking kind of built into it because the elevator here is dual-sided, kind of opening on both sides as it kind of comes up through the space.
So the elevator gives them both handicap access and the ability to bring whatever materials and bikes and everything up to the 3rd floor with lots of space in that 3rd floor in front of it.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Could you speak a bit to the site lighting, just in terms of how one navigates the site in the dark?
Well, we have an electrical consultant on board,
Yeah.
of course, and he's designed what you see in your site plan. You'll see the lights indicated on the site plan. I don't know if it's on the one that we have. Yeah, you can see them. It's not it doesn't have a text on there, but it's on your site plan, the hard copy. You'll see it, all the lights are designed so that we have the amount of lighting we need within the parking lot. It's all down lighting, of course. We're not going to shed onto the neighbors or anything else. Are you talking about specific lighting for somewhere within
I
the
just know
space?
that staff was hoping for thoughts on lighting, so
Yeah, I think
just wanted
the
to.
comment came before we did the lighting plan.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's normal, right? Like, we're gonna make sure that there's enough lighting out there. He's done his study right now of the site, and we'll continue to do that until we get into building permit plans. And we have to really focus on the pedestrian parking within the space as well, specifically from the visitor parking, to make sure that that's well lit directly towards the entrance. The saving grace here is we have one entrance really to the building, like one public entrance, so it's all focused on that one. There's not multiple spots to come and go. So I think that helps us with the lighting plan.
Yeah, okay. Aside from the portion of the green roof, was there other green initiatives that were considered for the project, stormwater management?
Yeah, there's
materials?
in the back of the package that you have, we've got a civil consultant on board, and we're doing stormwater management below the visitor parking area. So we've started the preparation. We know how much we need to have. We're going to implement the system on site.
Would that be a cistern system, or what's the?
Yeah, I'm going to forget the name of the system that we were talking about, but it's essentially that, and it's a filtering system, right? So and it slowly goes out to the city system.
I mean, the kind of
For major events, right? Like to hold the amount of water in place, so
Yeah.
we're not overloading the city services.
in a kind of abstract way, but I think a meaningful way, that the kind of commitment to building out of mass timber for the project is also kind of an inherent like energy or a carbon sink. It's, you know, if you look at, we've done a lot of kind of industrial building studies, and a lot of these buildings are just being built the same way they've been built forever. Right, and so by using this is all BC wood coming in the building, the CLTs are coming from Pintage, and the structure around the wood quite a bit. We'll bid out the glulam package, but it'll be the same thing. So we think that, you know, we've taken, like the one in Pemberton is actually a passive house factory, right, where they're actually kind of taking it to that next step. With the kind of requirements within John is kind of to build a good stewardship is kind of our approach to it, versus kind of being able to, because with these large scale buildings, it gets really tricky to do them kind of like passive, for example, because of the in and out for the doors. Like it's really tricky. But our intent with this would be to continue with our own practice, which is to do we try to push our clients gently towards kind of better construction processes, more so than just, you know, we'll do something with covering those kind of small things. But we think that the commitment here to a mass timber building is significant as a kind of as an example of what's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Can you just, what was the design vehicle used for deliveries and shipping? What size is it?
What size? So like on a regular basis, we'd have sort of probably, I don't know the exact length, but probably like a sea to sky flat deck type truck that comes in. on a, maybe once or twice a year, you'd have a full-size van that needs to back in kind of thing. But like daily deliveries would be sort of cube vans and vehicles of that size. And then most of the sort of like raw materials and goods that get shipped up because actually we try and practice a one-piece flow, which is sort of a lean methodology, where rather than housing a whole lot of inventory, we actually have more frequently with smaller deliveries. So it's usually it's sort of like your typical flat deck blue sky type size vehicle that comes in.
So what we've done is we've created 2 loading bays here in the building, and then another overhead door here, plus an opportunity for kind of like for loading for upstairs. So if we go to the plans, so this is kind of John's kind of truck coming in and kind of loading, dropping off. There's another one here because again we went back to that early diagram where there's kind of actual flow of how the spaces are working. It's quite sophisticated to be honest. But we're also looking at that we can have people coming, if they're delivering for upstairs, to the industrial spaces upstairs, they could also use the loading bay here to come up around through the space and can get to the back side of the freight elevator to move their stuff up in front versus kind of bringing it in through the front door, which is also possible. I mean, if it's depending on what the person's doing up there, but if they need, if they've got loading to do, they could do their unloading here and then deliver it to the back of the building. So we're trying to integrate the 2 different uses. It really is a bit of a Rubik's Cube as far as kind of space goes when you actually look at how much, not just equipment that John's using, but the flow of these pieces kind of coming back and forth. Like I had this silly idea that we just came through and it kind of went through and out the other end, but it actually drops back and goes back and forth and gets picked and then comes. He might not see it that way, but that's from my view of kind of what it was. So integrating the kind of loading was important to him on a kind of for his flow.
Could you just speak to the use of mass timber for this building specifically as far as if I'm right, you've got limitations as far as the spans that you're allowed within the building, and I know it like
just from a structural point of view as far as the spans go. So like I said, we've done a number of these buildings over the years. The span and depth is it's more of a shipping requirement as far as getting the blue lamps here. So what we've done is we've actually we'll have a row of columns here, a row of columns down the middle, and then the row of columns picking up the edge of the roof above. And then again, the building that we did in Pemberton was the same thing, 20-foot grid, so that the CLTs are coming in 40-foot lifts so that you're not having to cut them and rehandle them. They can be kind of stacked right up and go. They're providing all of our shear requirements for the building as well. And then because of the rating requirements between the lower floor and the upper floor, we're using the CLTs for the fire rating as well between the 2 different spaces. But as far as our spans go, we just did an arena in Hazelton, which we did all out of wood, and we managed to span the whole arena in wood as well. It's a different project we talk about later, but the requirements, if you're kind of smart about it, aren't really limited to the structure of the wood. The Blue-Ram engineering has come a long way, and then tying it into the CLT because they become rigid panels, so it becomes a diagram too. What we'll do what we did in Pemberton was to actually prefab the panels and then the roof panels, and then they kind of sit in and drop and give the building structure during construction as well. So we're very keen on, we don't find much limitations to actually using the wood, other than now the only issue that we've got is the European suppliers are trying to undercut the market, so they're coming in with lower prices to ship it from Austria, which is bizarre for like BC, but that's kind of, we don't see a structural limitation. You have to have the right structural engineer, like for sure. And, the group we're working with here, we've worked with extensively.
That's all for me. Thanks.
I only have 2 questions, I think. The main one, the variance is only 2.7 feet. The reason for that variance was, like, what's the height of the overall upper floor? Like, ceiling height in there?
It's not the ceiling height so much as the height underneath the structure we're fighting. So we're at 8 feet underneath the structure at some point. Yeah, we can't really go any lower than that. And so really what we're asking, the variance ends up asking for a little less than what we're actually raising the site up. Like we have to raise the site up 3 feet and a little bit over, and we're asking for Yes, 2.8.
Where we?
Right,
2.7.
Yeah, so it's just we really try to play the game structurally too, to try to make everything work, but it was becoming too difficult.
Where we got caught too a little bit with it was when we did the original planning with the structural engineer, they had assumed improperly that it was going to be office space above, so it's a 50,000 square foot for their loading, and then when we came back and said, you can't do office space here, like we're not allowed, it has to be manufacturing industrial space, and the requirements doubled, which means the depth of the beams got significant below that floor, which then is again the clearance that we need in the second floor where John's workspaces. We've got the same sort of thresholds. So we're not asking for, just to be clear, like extra height. We're asking just to be kind of made up the difference of the floodplain to the center of the road. Like that's really the difference of the project. Because when we did the calculations, and I'll be honest, we haven't experienced that before where the heights are being measured off of the site. Everything we've worked on has been measured from like average from the four corners, and Whistler does it differently. They're stacking it and all that to take it from the road. So we think, I can't talk specifically to this, but maybe Elaine can. I think there's been other projects that have gone with the same approach here, because to lose that 3 feet would be significant hardship for the project, because to put that top floor in, which is a revenue generator for me, would be fine. So we're still, in our mind, working within the height requirements. It's just because of the way it's being calculated off the center of the road and the floodplain pushing us up.
Jonas?
If I could just add to some context. We are looking at heights in general in the business park because it is not an issue from kind of neighborhood impact viewscape perspective. So we've been quite supportive of anybody who comes through the door who wants to increase the height for employment space.
Thanks.
Context.
Cool. My next question was, I understand it's super hard to make buildings like this fit within sort of the passive standard with garage doors and air types and everything. Did you guys consider going for like a higher step code or LEED certification or sort of anything down that road?
Well, we have to follow the step code for, we believe, we're still going through this for the cafe and the public space upstairs. We're trying to determine how that's going to play out. You know, with the building permit submission, we've talked to the building inspector already briefly about that. It's pretty difficult to do with the industrial spaces.
What we did in Pemberton is we couldn't pull it off. Like I don't know if you're familiar with the building now, but what we did is we made all the office spaces and the kind of the meeting rooms and stuff. We built that to passive standard using the same panels that come out of the factory. And then what we did is we tempered the floor with a biomass in the industrial space, because they're in and out all the time. So we tempered the floor there with radiant heat. From a biomass collecting all of their offcuts throughout the year. So they're actually recycling their own kind of within the building. So that works. I know there was one project in northern BC that actually went the whole way to kind of passive industrial space. It's a significant application because of the volume of the building to get the passive calculation done. We're doing 2 passive certified projects right now in more office space, which is kind of more leaning that way. Again, I think John's commitment to this has been that we're not looking at doing tilt-up, right? We're looking at doing a mass timber building, which has different kind of metrics of measurement of sustainability.
Right.
But if you can find me some good overhead doors that are cheap, that I can kind of start using these spaces, we'll continue to push the envelope on it for sure.
Yeah, my sense is that once we get a set of construction drawings that we actually get firm costing on, because at this point we're still working with pro formas and things of that nature, it's kind of like, it's a pretty substantial project, and we'll do whatever we can actually accomplish that's feasible. We'd love to do it. It's a difficult thing to just roll in and promise it. Be like, yeah, we'll put the whole thing out passive, and that's your help with that. It's a difficult thing to. I'm sure it's. I haven't run the numbers on it, but I'm sure it would be increasing.
Yeah, I mean these German
doors would be not cheap, I'm sure.
But it's also the kind of, for LEED we've done, Al and I both been in a couple of LEED Platinum projects, one of them being the outdoor school, and the commitment to kind of the site development on that project, to make it work for LEED is, it's an institutional type project more so than a kind of privately developed project. It was a burden for the project, but at the same time, that's where they found it's outside of the school district funding, so that's how they kind of did their funding profile to it. So it's kind of balanced that way. Our point with John and with the people in Pemberton was that these buildings should be a kind of clear representation of the type of craft and skill that we're using in your own business versus kind of, nothing against tilt-up, but a tilt-up building that someone just goes in and rents. Like, so that seems to be as far right now as we can kind of gently push everybody.
Fair enough. I just want,
Yeah. We're trying.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Believe me.
That's all I have.
I just have a couple of questions. One is, what's the base of the light standard that's going to be in the peninsula between the two accessible parking spaces? Like what, do you know what the...
I haven't really got into that much detail yet, but I'm assuming it's just a concrete base. It's within the landscaping, yeah.
Just as long as it doesn't shoot out like 5 feet.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Good. And then the staff washrooms that are on the main floor, are those accessible washrooms?
Yes, yeah.
That's all I have.
Thanks.
So thank you for creating a sculpturally appealing building, because that's, in Public Art Committee, that's something we really look for. So thank you very much for that. Just a couple of quick questions on signage, or how is the building being identified from the street? You mentioned something around the back.
Yeah, at the entranceway to the building, at the driveway, there's a, I don't know, we can point it out.
Is that off the
Site plan
Queensway?
again. Yeah, there's a basalt slab sign at the entranceway to the driveway.
Right, I think she's asking from.
I'm asking from the Queensway
Yeah,
site.
no, we don't have signage from Queensway. We were purposely not putting signage on the building itself. The entranceway to the building is around the corner on the access road, and we think that's fairly clear from the way the building's designed. Like, I think it'll be very obvious where it's going to be.
So it's not intended to be found
or
identified?
I think it'll be identified. John mentioned earlier about the uniqueness of the building being one of the identifiers for people as well, which is...
But I'm saying if people like are delivering things or whatever to the building, how will they know how to find it?
Well, the address would be, we have to figure out kind of, because the access road, so we're in a funny spot here.
Yeah.
Because the building isn't really come off the Queensway, right?
No.
Like there's, I mean, you could try to go through the process of kind of curb cutting to get up there, but with the change in height in the floodplain, it would be really difficult. So now what we have is we have this future access road. I don't
which will have a name.
Which will have a name at some point and an address, which
Oh,
would then
okay.
be how we would identify the building, which is why we push the entry to that side, because at some point this thing will be built out.
Okay.
So that would be, so we'll call it Hewitt Road or whatever the hell it will be.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll be Hewitt.
And you put it there, and so whatever the number is, and that would be
Okay.
picked up in the front elevation of the building for the address.
But I see that there is signage available for the tenant on the
Yeah,
front of
right
the
at the
building?
same thing, at that same entry, so if you're coming
And then
into
on the building.
to the space here, so there'd be a sign here kind of showing the address of the site, and then as you come into the building here, there's that lower wall that's kind of the black and steel, which we would have all the tenant signage there, so that they can kind of, you can find if you're going to meet somebody who's doing some craft work on the third floor, you're not kind of lost. Like because again, to Alvin's point, there's only one main entry.
Yeah.
And once you're in it, there's only one big staircase, and it takes you, we also think because it's be top lit, there'd actually be quite a lot of gravity kind of going up the stairs versus kind of trying to find your way. So I think that as long as we get a name on that road at some point in the future.
But still, there's no identification from Queensway for any of the smaller industries that are going to be there.
I don't think so.
Just something to consider,
Okay,
because
sure.
they'll want to be identified in order to have people know where to find them.
Fair enough. I mean, part of I would think that the identification of the industry of the specifically would happen. We've got on the top floor. We're showing. Do you know? We're showing kind of glazed connections between this space and the industrial spaces, and so our intent would be as people come up the stairs, and there's this kind of small little kind of service cafe, that there's opportunities for signage and glazing along their own kind of unique little nests within the building as well. So as you're coming up there, but
Yeah, but it's that's internal. I'm talking about external.
Sure, I understand.
But thank you. And then in terms of clean tech, green tech, those parking spaces and bike spaces, is the bike space secured?
The secure, we've broken them up so that we have secure bikes parking for John's staff on the ground floor. And then in each one of these units, you can see them there, the dashes outlined.
Yes,
There's
okay.
2 secure spaces within your own unit. That way we don't try to create a communal space where everybody's locking their bikes up.
Fair. And would you have electric charging stations for the parking lot?
We don't have any electric charging stations yet, no.
Just something to consider
Yeah.
for the future or near future. And just in terms of the public space realm and public art, that south-facing wall that looks like
the metal wall.
this.
Yeah.
It's just, is it pure metal? Is it? And
It's
what color is it?
It's dark gray, blackish. It's a sheet steel, so it's like 1/4-inch steel plates that are put up there.
Okay.
You're starting to see it on more buildings these days, but
this one?
Yeah.
In an ideal world, we would have wrapped the whole building in the wood, but there is cladding requirements from setback from the property line, which we can't make on this property. So, you know, there's opportunity, you could go with these alternate solutions and sprinkler and all that kind of stuff. Instead, we're just kind of saying that
we couldn't possibly make that, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Again, it's kind of within John's, like, comes out of the room kind of.
It has to be non-combustible.
Okay.
So
on that side
there
of the
would be an
building.
opportunity to do something there. I guess I just don't know how that budget's out.
Just something in the public realm. I'm just thinking, is there a building going to be built south of there, and then they're looking at this black wall, and a blank wall, and it would be nice if there was an opportunity to not even permanently, but if you could affix type of flat or freeze type art there.
Yeah, one thing we didn't show on that elevation is if there's a row of trees.
There's a line of aspens all the way down there, which is about the height of that first notch out on the left-hand side of the building.
Sorry?
There's a line of aspen trees that run all the way down there, which is about the height of that first notch out.
So it's the bottom row.
Yeah.
Will be covered in trees there too.
Okay, that bottom row?
Yeah.
Because there's going to be another, you assume that the person's going to build next to the building up within their setback requirements. It's kind of a back, it's really the back piece of the building.
Yeah.
That's where you quite often see the painted.
Exactly.
Wall, right?
Exactly. So I was just wondering if that would be a future consideration to affix, even in the upper 2 rows, some sort of themed piece of art or of a local artist.
It's difficult to put something out there that's going to have to be removed later. Like we have to be careful of that too. We can't go over our setback. So
something to consider.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My questions were asked, but I just, for clarity, the top floor, clear span space in the top floor, how many feet?
The clear headroom.
Yeah, you mentioned 8 feet.
Well, it's I think we're shooting for 8 feet below the beams, and I believe the beams up there are slightly less than a meter. Oh, I'm forgetting on my head.
So clear span 8 up to 11, possibly in between.
Yeah, so that's basically we're trying to keep this space as they come through the public space. So we want to express the wood for sure as part of the structure, but and that would be limited to the kind of to the snow loading and stuff across that one piece. So that's really where the kind of opportunity is. If we're going to have to squeeze it, like if you say no, you can't have the extra space. You're not going to support that, then we're going to have to go back and really squeeze and push kind of everything to kind of get it back within it. I don't know if it's possible. Our hope would be that we would get the support just to kind of not have to kind of crunch the building that way, because these open wood spaces are better, right? If we get a little bit of light in them versus kind of having kind of a low ceiling. So we're, again, the restriction here is the underside of that roof beam.
And if you look at the top section there, the roof slopes, we have to slope the roof for the water, of course, for drainage. So we're at the high point, we're somewhere between 11 and 12 feet, I can't tell exactly from here, and then we slope down from that to make sure that we're within, that beam is no more than, or no less than 8 feet above the floor on that beam. So we're going to be another, at the far end where we're at the low point, it's going to be 8 feet plus almost 3 feet. So it's going to be between 10 and 11 feet on that.
Yeah. And the common space is on the small side, and then the working
right.
space is on the large side.
That's correct. That's
okay.
Right.
Okay. My other question was just around the truck movement. And I know that you typically have smaller box vans, but what happens, have you examined what happens in the case of a large 18-wheel delivery or something like that?
Yeah, it's a topic of discussion for sure, like getting somebody in there, and it was no matter where we kind of located the building, it was always a tough decision as to how it's going to happen. The best scenario that we came up with here, the reason that this is designed the way it is that we figured a truck has two options. It could either drive straight down into the site, getting away from the public parking on the north side there. So they come straight down into the site, and then they back out onto the road and turn and get onto Queensway. So the other benefit of that access road is that they're not trying to get in and out of Queensway with a big truck. Or they could drive up the access road and back down, the same kind of scenario. So there's no real easy way with a site this size trying to get somebody out.
We went through like the actual kind of original discovery with John about how many times this actually happens and where the truck is, that size truck is showing up, and it's not a everyday occurrence by any stretch, and so it's once or twice every couple of months basically or less. So the plan was originally, just to kind of, as things have evolved, we originally had a caretaker's suite on the top floor as well, which created a whole bunch of access issues and that kind of stuff. So by removing that piece of it, we think that the building will only be operated more for like business hours. So if he was doing a delivery and to keep out of the way of his other tenants, there'd have to be some coordination about kind of what time the truck was being dropped off, so it was there for a loading and picked up in the evening. So there's a kind of, one of the funny things that you come out of it, you get to know different people as they're talking about it. We were like, okay, we can squeeze the parking requirement if we do this, and squeeze the parking requirement if we do this. And John was like, no, don't do that, because there's lots of spots that don't have enough parking here, and it really creates an issue for the kind of the viability of the spaces they're trying to rent. So we actually think are carrying one extra space now, but we didn't do any shortcuts kind of through the map to kind of get it so that we think that there will be enough room at the back end of that site for him to be able to get that in there if he's coordinated and how he uses it.
So a related item to this is that that staff would like ADP feedback on is that the site plan does so it's got the drive aisle a bit wider at the south side to allow for that truck turning, but that's something that staff would like ADP feedback on is sort of that wider drive aisle.
So we followed the property line on the west side with the parking, so it's kind of on an angle to the building, so that it opens it up in the back. And the reason we did that was one, for loading and for John to do what he has to do back there during the daytime or after hours, but also to get garbage down there as well. And so that was part of our discussions we contacted GFL and sent them a couple of schemes to kind of figure out how big the garbage enclosure had to be, how they were going to access it. They were quite happy with this, coming into the site away from everybody else and having the space at the back so that they wouldn't have any problems coordinating their truck with the garbage pickup.
And with that kind of just that gentle opening, where instead of having the drive aisle specifically set, there's just a little bit of kind of just a little bit of extra, like the distance between here and here is wider than it needs to be versus the set drive aisle and the rest of it. That's just trying to take the best advantage of that kind of opportunity as we can to kind of alleviate the same things. But we all have talked about it extensively as far as what the requirements are. John's going to have to manage his tenants and manage himself as part of it. But this is, I think, was a better solution than trying to do it where we wrap, to the earlier question, we wrap it and try to get it all around the building and hope that it all works out. Right? So that if someone's coming in to get to like the cafe, if we push the building up and put it on the lower side, then you've got one drive aisle that's kind of everything is blocked. And at least this way, we think that there's, there is the public parking and the visitor parking at the front that should be unencumbered by any of this kind of delivery stuff.
Thank you.
It's actually the best opportunity for any big truck to come into this site is on that back corner.
Yeah.
Like to give them the room on the access road to turn.
Does anyone else have any questions? Anything specific to Elaine's last point? One more question.
Yeah, sorry. The public space in the cafe, is that just going to be public space for the tenants only, or you're not really expecting anybody beyond that?
No, you'd like people beyond that, yeah.
Oh,
for
okay.
sure.
We have a limit of 30 people because it's not a commercial kitchen. We're just expecting like a cafe, like a coffee spot or selling baked goods or John's got some grandiose ideas. Yeah,
So,
not going to share his coffee machine, but the general public will be.
And we discussed this with the building department too, because if it goes over, if it becomes like a 60-person thing, right, then you've got different
oh yeah,
building code requirements and zoning requirement, the whole thing. So we've set it as a maximum of 30 people, and by having it 30 people, then it actually in the code, I can pull up the article, but then it becomes considered a D, an office space. As part of it, so that, and the building inspector that we spoke to during our preliminary meetings was clear and clear to John that that's what it's for. So yeah, there is a possibility of people coming to the building and kind of hanging out there.
Max. Yeah.
But there's 30 people all the time. That's his max, or he's now no longer. It's the same thing with he can't sell it for or can't rent it for office space on the top floor because it doesn't meet the zoning.
I just wondered about if it is a public space,
Yes, public.
what the aesthetic will be and how it will be designed in terms of form and
Yeah, so it's still to be determined there. I mean, obviously we build interiors for people's beautiful homes and we see it as an opportunity to have that be a demonstration of some of our works. I'd like for it to have a thread of quality through it for sure. Still yet to be determined exactly what that'll look like in terms of if there's somebody else operating a small cafe space or whether we do it ourselves or how that looks, but I'd like for it to be quite nice.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, if what you're thinking is like a storefront in a mall.
Oh,
where
no,
somebody
I wasn't
rents it out,
thinking of a
puts their
storefront.
signs up, no, I mean inside, they're not going to put like BMW colors or something
Oh, no.
inside there.
No, I was thinking more the aesthetic of,
Yeah.
a public space.
Yeah.
I think this idea all comes back to this idea of being this kind of industrial, kind of intellectual hub space. Like that's the part that was of all the things that John said was the most interesting to us. If we do this right, and because we've got a master mill worker working as the client, we should be able to build up something stunning.
Yes, hence my question. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so now we'll move on to comments. And I'll start with Dennis.
Yeah, I think it's a great project. I think you guys have done a really good job considering it's an industrial building. It speaks to John's craft. There's such a commonality there. It's really lovely to see. It's not a tilt-up, which we are seeing a lot of. I know there's a cost implication here, so for the client to commit to that, it's wonderful. I think the cutaway on the front of the building is sort of a lovely window into what's happening there. I think it's appropriate for an industrial building. I wouldn't want to see more of that happening.
Yeah.
I don't think there needs to be a bunch of articulation or screening or anything up front because it's manufacturing. Because it is so lovely, I would really want to see it pushed to the corner. I hear your argument about parking and keeping that, the public parking separate. I don't know if there's opportunity to maybe, put the drive aisle on the back so it's sort of like a drive-through. Sounds terrible, but you can drive from the access road out. Maybe it's just an out on Queensway, just to get it closer to that corner. I think it would celebrate that cutaway a bit more. Other than that, it's great. Good job.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful building, really well proportioned, and it's similar, refreshing to see compared to some of the other things we've seen. I just feel like the west and north elevations are the ones that are really awesome, and then the Queensway one is just maybe a 3-story wall with a little bit too flat. I really enjoy the timber cladding, and I really like the cover sort of rendering, just because it kind of shows almost like a very slight difference in color between the two. So I would maybe comment that keeping the same material but playing with the scale or the spacing of that wood just could provide a real slight change to that facade, and that's all it would need to stop it looking like a three-story.
Are we allowed to respond now, or do we wait till the end?
Yeah, I think we can discuss a little bit within reason.
We've been kind of working through the same kind of ideas, but we didn't want to kind of pitch it today because it's not fully present. But by doing, because John's got the CNC capacity in there, by building like just a slight change in depth of some of these elements, you could create a kind of like a much different texture along that Queensway facade, which we think would be very like compelling. So I hear your comment for sure. At the same time, it's kind of within, we really appreciate John's enthusiasm for this, but you know, when we did the project in Pemberton, they were very enthusiastic too, and they said you can't spend more money than it's spent on a tilt-up. So, and that one we kind of were close to. We've got to be careful here with what we're asking him to do at the same time, right? Because if it was a tilt-up, you know, we talked about pink color. So we're going to try to push it as much as we can to get that kind of difference and that kind of quality for the type of building. But I don't want to oversell John's cards here.
Yeah, that's good. And then just in reference to the planning question about the drive aisle, I don't see any problem with the driving aisle planning it like that. I think it creates a little bit more space and maybe some space for, you know, doing some work outside in the summer and things like that. Okay.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This will be a really, really cool space to work. It's a really thoughtful building. I echo a lot of the comments already. I think overall the massing is really thoughtful. And if there is an opportunity to look at Queensway and play with that texture a bit, that would be great. In terms of the variance, I think that there's really good reason why you're asking for it, and I don't see any concerns with that, particularly since we're on floodplain. We have to be forced to go up. The stormwater management is a great start to sort of the landscape approach to more sustainable approach. And with regards to the landscape planting, I really appreciate why there's that simple palette. And I would encourage wherever possible to consider some plants that might gesture and allow for a bit more pollinators. For example, maybe more in the back where the pachysandra is. We could get in some really good stuff in there to get the bees going in the summer. And it's just kind of an aside, but when you're looking closer at the patio, if it's possible for your requirements to consider extending it a little bit and having a bit more lounge space. Right now it seems that it just offers for eating, and it'd be great to have some chairs to chill, maybe, you know, some canopies for the winter and such like that. So I think a lot of people will be gravitating to be up there. But overall, very supportable.
Yeah, thanks for the great presentation. I agree, it's highly supportable. I think it's really awesome to see these industrial buildings come through with the use in mind that are really well thought out. It creates a very different building than I think we're used to seeing, and it helps us really dig into the detail, which I think we did today, which is great. I would suggest that for those upper floor spaces to be more attractive to potential tenants, you maybe approach going for a higher ceiling height and increase the size of the variance, because I think if you can get a 14-foot ceiling on those areas that aren't under this span, that would be ideal for some of these maker spaces and these uses that might have rack storage or what have you. And I hope council would be, I certainly think I would be supportive of that variance. I hope council would be as well. I think it's great that you're going with mass timber, and that should be looked at as a differentiator on this project compared to other industrial buildings. Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I'm just going to pretty much say what everyone else has said, in that I think the building's beautiful. I love the building up in Pemberton. I've taken a tour of it and been there a number of times. I think it's gorgeous. I think this one is definitely setting a tone. I don't know that there'll be many other people that try and follow along with this, but yeah, I think it's gorgeous. I think the glass wall in the front is super cool. I think being able to watch what you guys do from the street when you're walking by is a pretty awesome idea. I didn't think of it, but just as Carla said that, I think, yeah, going higher and seeing if you could get a variance to go higher, especially if it's something that you guys are already considering allowing for might make more sense. But yeah, I hope John can fit his pizza oven somewhere.
Thank you for the presentation. It's a great project. I'm not going to echo everything, what everyone said. It's fantastic. And yeah, again, I think a variance to go higher if needed would be quite supportable. I appreciate the accessible placement of the accessible parking and that the washrooms are accessible and there's an elevator. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for creating a beautiful building that now raises the bar for industrial design. It'll, I think, hopefully spur people, inspire people to build industrial buildings in this vein. I love that you're going to push for a variance because I think it could go higher and enhance that whole space. Just consider electric stations for charging, or at least one even, and then that south wall for whoever your neighbor is, and even just as you're driving up Queensway as some sort of aesthetic, and then again the interior piece. Thank you for considering that as a public realm.
My turn. I think it's a great project. I especially think it's a wonderful project from a functionality point of view. It's just really balanced, really well thought out. I wish we had more of this. I really wish that our mud zone was one of these buildings with a couple of layers of housing on top, and then that would be sort of a dream mud building that maybe something to aim for someone else. I think all my comments have been incorporated into this, including the height. Absolutely support that. So I think we'll move to...
Sorry, can I ask a question? So I appreciate all the comments very much. For the height restrict, like for the ask now, so we can kind of go back and think what would be the best for the spaces, and then come back, and then does that go, how does that work? Does that come back to this group again, or does it go directly to the council?
Well, they're about to make a recommendation, which will be one of 4 choices of either it comes back or whatever, so that'll be up to them, but certainly it'll be a review by staff and then a decision by council.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, they'll see our comments as a group. So, okay, so we'll go to recommendations. I'll need to read through the list as usual. Potential recommendation A, that advisory design panel supports the project and does not need to see this project returned for further review. B, that the advisory design panel supports the project in general and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve the following recommendations. C, that the advisory design panel supports the project in general and would like the applicant to resolve recommendations and return to advisory design panel. And D, that the advisory design panel does not support the project for the following reasons. Any recommendations for an option?
B.
B from Sarah. Any conversation on that? That seem appropriate?
I'm wondering whether or not we should have a conversation about, like, there's the variance for the existing, for the height that's over the floodplain, and then whether or not we should make, see how much support there is to go to 14 foot between the buildings, if that would provide extra support.
I'm not sure if we can speak to what a variance process is going to do.
Yeah, I would stay out of it. I mean, we've heard from the panel that it sounds like generally people are supportive of going higher, and height is not an issue. Yeah, I think we heard that loud and clear. I think staff feel the same way about it. So I don't think it's necessary to put in a motion. I think council, from having some experience with this new council, would also see it that way. So I just don't think it would be an issue if the applicants decide to go that way.
Does it make sense then to go option A, and then it's up to the applicant to make that decision if they want to go for a higher variance or not, just with our notes of support, unless there is some standout comment?
No, well, I just didn't know whether or not the comments of trying to vary the
Right,
texture.
right, need to be added in there.
Could,
Mhm.
and that, in which case it's be to work with staff on that.
Were there any concerns in general that we are pointing out to staff? Otherwise, I would suggest A is probably the road, unless for B there were specific concerns that we were directing staff to work with.
I think Anne's had a comment around the placement on the site.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how everyone else
Yes.
feels about that, but we can have a discussion around that, maybe at one item.
Yeah, I mean, site circulation has to work for the client, and planning is capable of figuring that out. My comment is that the building is so lovely. I don't want to see it secondary to parking.
Right.
But I mean, if it's not something that can be resolved, then it is what it is.
If I could bring one item forward, is that John is under extreme pressure with this project to get, because
We're also going to be homeless.
he's going to I can really appreciate the comment we're pushing the building forward, and I appreciate that. What we're going to try to do is find the simplest path forward for him from the timing point of view, because this isn't a project that's going to float for 6 months or a year or 2 years or waiting for funding to come in place. So we need to start right away. So that would be our only concern, like if we have to come back to
With respect, there are time constraints on every project we have, and we would really appreciate for ADP's thoughtful thoughts on that, because I think that's a totally valid point. So recognizing that there's a discussion about the site circulation, staff would love to hear ADP's thoughts on the placement of the building.
I can say that my individual preference is to have it as it is. I actually really appreciate those buildings that have some parking visible from the street. I know it's an inclination that is trying to be avoided by contemporary planning and architecture, but I actually personally really enjoy seeing the stalls in front of the building as I'm driving by the building, and whether or not they're available on this and that. So there's other reasons why it could be considered a good way to go functionally. So, but anyone else's comments are welcome.
I guess there's a question that I had, and maybe I should have asked it, but is there an opportunity in the future to connect to the other parts of the site? Is that something that is under discussion, or is it, you'll deal with it when that site comes online, whenever that may be?
Yeah, we don't know when it's going to be.
Exactly,
They're not sold yet, but it is as we said, it's a really tight site, and trying to get circulation around the whole entire site is difficult. And we really didn't want to take an access off of Queensway. That's the lowest point as well, which gives us a steeper incline back. In the order to separate the public and the industrial type of uses, this was really the best solution of all the ones that we worked through to try to separate that industrial use from any general public coming onto the site. If we try to push the building up to that top corner, all of a sudden we're mixing the two. We're causing more problems, I believe, on site than we really want.
Bang for the last 3 years, and you should!
That's not terrible. I know that.
Okay.
Okay, well,
So then should we,
shall we go for A or B? What's the general consensus in the group?
I would say A.
A? Okay, so we are saying that advisory design panel supports the project and does not need to see this project returned for further review. Motion, second. Everyone in favor? Everyone against? It's unanimous. Shall we take? Sorry?
was the Mike the seconder?
Yes. So we'll just take a 5-minute break right now. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Item number 2 is DP number 500, 37781 Cleveland Avenue, and we will start with a presentation.
Carrie Hamilton, planner for the District of Squamish. I'm the planner for Development Permit 500, and today you'll be seeing a 2-building mixed-use development located at 37781 Cleveland Avenue. And the proposed development is offering 4 residential units consisting of 45% of the gross floor area, and the remaining 55% will be dedicated to a diverse range of employment spaces. It falls under Development Permit Area 7 and Development Permit Area 3, which are for Downtown South, and the universal guidelines in our new OCP. The project hasn't been presented to the advisory design panel before, and staff are generally supportive of the development, with some specific requests from ADP to review a few things. One of them is the rear building siding. Some concern is that does the white convey this eclectic, funky, and creative building form? So we'd like to get your opinion on that. The chain link fence, which it kind of conflicts in both different development permit guidelines. Chain link fence should be screened, but this is also Downtown South, which the yellow coated could be seen as funky and eclectic, so we'd like to get your opinion on that. There's a plexiglass in the middle kind of courtyard area that potentially could be an opportunity for public art, or there's other areas that we would love to get this panel's consideration on public art. It is, that's a guideline both in DPA 3 and in DPA 7. And the last is that this application is proposing to have a height variance, or a variance to exemptions in our height. So they have a rooftop patio that in the MUD 2 zone they're allowed a number of exemptions to support a rooftop patio. However, they're looking to add more walls and ceilings, or a rooftop to that, to allow for some covered spaces in the rooftop, but as well to support their PV panels, which will help bring this building to at minimum a step 4. So they are trying to achieve a higher step code with this one as well. So those are staff's kind of a quick review of the report. And I'll leave it over to Chris to present the project.
Thanks. Bear with a bit of the navigation. I'm not quite sure how to get it to click through like full slide at a time. I just scroll. Okay. So apologize for that. Hi everyone. Thanks very much for your time and attention today. My name is Chris Hunter. I'm the architect on the project. I'm also legally obliged to disclose that I'm a financial partner in the development company. These kind of blokes around me are my development partners. Julian from Consider Design is the landscape architect on the project. We're very excited to present our proposed redevelopment of a vacant site, 37781 Cleveland Avenue, under a recently approved MUD 2 rezoning. For those of you who are not familiar with this new zoning, the district recently worked through a comprehensive public consultation process to gain feedback for what the community envisioned for this eclectic neighborhood, previously C10 or Artisan Village. Currently, most lots in the neighborhood are zoned I3, I1, or non-conforming residential uses. The upper right image shows a general zoning context, where the MUD 2 zone is situated relative to C4 commercial to the north of Vancouver Street, along with various large-scale CD developments along Cleveland Avenue, the Mamquam Channel, and of course the ocean front to the south. Given this, MUD 2 we affectionately refer to as the knuckle of downtown, where the community transitions from the historical and quickly densifying C4 neighborhood to the new community which will begin to be established on the waterfront. You see in the lower right map how our project at 37781 in the red polygon there is just south of Vancouver Street and Cleveland Avenue intersection. We are the second parcel in from the corner lot, which currently has a single family house on it. The adjacent 3 lots to the south have various storage uses and light industrial activity on them. Well, to the east there is the Dyke Access Trail, a tidal slough, and a 600-foot lot facing the east side of Cleveland Avenue. So let's run this side. This slide shows the existing street frontages on the left, as well as a few dominant surrounding properties which are in construction or planning stages over on this side. The takeaway from this slide is that the immediate urban context is quickly densifying and providing quite a different landscape than what we see in existing streetscape images. I'll touch on this further later in the presentation. This page shows a few precedents we have utilized in our discussions with the district throughout the development permit process. All of these projects embrace their small lot sizes by providing unique architectural, programmatic, and scale solutions to tight urban lots. They all represent diverse strategies within changing neighborhoods, and to us that's the charm of small lot development, something that MUD 2 is trying to facilitate.
And the majority of lots in MUD 2 are 50 foot by 120. And there's a article in the MUD 2 zoning that only allows amalgamation of 2 lots in total. So the biggest building you'll have is a 100-foot lot. So the hope is we have a lot of small projects throughout this whole neighborhood over the next 20, 50, 100 years. These diagrams describe the site massing strategies which informed our design. MUD 2 restricts its density with lot coverage and building height. At 60% lot coverage, shown in the top left first diagram, most projects would typically front Cleveland Avenue with parking at the rear. This strategy biases the lane as a vehicular route and loads density and allowable 35-foot height to the front street. The district's MUD 2 zoning also incentivizes developers to provide 5-meter high ground floor ceilings by allowing a roughly 5 meter increase in building height. The intent is to establish more functional and adaptive ground floor commercial spaces, which could also accommodate mezzanines, offices, or alternate uses which require higher volumes. We think this is a worthwhile spatial quality and attracts eclectic artistic tenants. The second key goal of MUD 2 was to try to facilitate 50-50 split of commercial to residential uses. We've had strong market support and interest from the rec tech and manufacturing sectors in Squamish's small business community, and hope our design attracts a dynamic mix of tenants. We are proposing a 55% commercial to 45% residential split in program. Knowing our project is the first redevelopment along Cleveland Avenue in MUD 2, we decided it was important to integrate the building into the existing context as best we could, given the site and zoning constraints. Firstly, we reduced the main building's massing by pushing roughly a third of its footprint to the rear of the lane, creating a secondary commercial space above the surface parking, which we think caters to small-scale manufacturers or artists. Secondly, we elected to keep the overall height of the rear building lowable than the allowable height, thereby reducing the impact of the development on the laneway and neighboring parcels. The third key site strategy was to implement a through-block walkway, which would connect pedestrians from Cleveland through the central courtyard to the lane. Not only is this a practical way to get ample weather protection for the storefront doors and residential lobby, it also provides interaction and social space for the residents and commercial tenants, as well as setting a precedent for an east-west terrain throughout the greater neighborhood. We've also been working with a number of industry partners to develop this project and are humbled that we've been selected as one of 17 finalists in the Better Building BC Net Zero Challenge, which supports net zero projects in their planning and design phase with grant incentives. Knowing the ambition and goals of the district to pursue net zero and passive standards over all zoning districts, over the coming decade, we are pleased to have their support moving this project through the planning phase. Achieving net zero essentially means that we have a very efficient, high-performance envelope, and we produce close to all our electric energy needs on site. A ground-source geothermal heat system will provide the heating and cooling needs for the project, while the photovoltaic panels on the roof will offset 50% of the electrical requirements to run the mechanical system. So in order to actually get to net zero, we would need significantly more energy generation on site, which is almost next to impossible given our climate and the urban condition and the amount of roofscape we have to accommodate PV. So that's going to come up in kind of Carrie's discussion about the height variance and how much surface area of roof we're kind of comfortable with to generate as much energy as we can on this type lot. We have further reduced the overall massing by implementing side yard light wells and terraces. So that's in the bottom right image. This colorful inset addresses general DPA guideline concerns about blank sidewalls, especially in redeveloping neighborhoods, while also providing light cross-ventilation opportunities to the long floor plans of the office and residential uses. This is the site plan, Cleveland Avenue on the left, laneway on the right. South is actually at the top of the page. You can see there's essentially two buildings, one larger facing Cleveland Avenue with a through-block walkway along the north property line and a courtyard separating the front building from the rear, which sits above the surface parking shown. We have intentionally provided a dynamic mix of commercial spaces,
We have a ground floor commercial unit in the Cleveland building with potential mezzanines, second floor offices above that, and the laneway building which has artisan lofts above the surface parking. We think this diversity will attract a mix of professionals, artisans, cultivators, and reinforce the diversity that the community loves within this neighborhood. The top 2 floors of the Cleveland building have 2 residential units per floor, private bedrooms oriented to the courtyard, and social living spaces facing Cleveland Avenue. A flex space is oriented to the side yard light wells, which could act as a 3rd bedroom or a home office and facilitate live-work scenarios. Side terraces and a communal rooftop deck provide plenty of opportunity for exterior space, views, and social interaction between tenants. The architectural facades utilize a precast cementitious panel system. We chose this for a number of reasons. It has very high thermal performance. It facilitates efficient airtight construction, which helps us meet our energy and air exchange goals for net zero. It has a high resilience to weather, incredibly durable, low maintenance, plenty of options for finish, color, and texture. It has a great fire resistance, achieving 4 hours quite easily. It's a fully prefabricated system, thus reducing site installation time and reducing some of the burden and challenges we have experienced firsthand on small urban lot developments. A series of projecting window bands maintains the rhythm, a simple rhythm of the facade while lending an opportunity to introduce some black stained cedar accents and shadows. Yellow cement panel cladding, guardrails, window frames, and soffits amplify the side yard light wells cut into the side of the main building and add a colorful hue of diffuse light which will spill down to the ground floor pedestrian levels. The rear building is smaller in scale, and we are proposing to wrap it in standing seam metal in a soft off-white. This is a nod materially to the rustic sheds and containers strewn about the laneways in the neighborhood, while also providing a bold contrast and tone to the front building, which we think helps delineate the courtyard. A skycatcher sawtooth roofline breaks down the massing even further and provides the unique side elevations and shadows. This section describes the connectivity between floor plate relationships between the 2 buildings. The rear building is elevated above the parking to provide weather protection to the cars. The mezzanine level in the front building will connect across a steel bridge to provide accessible elevator access to the rear building offices. This section shows the through-block walkway in the front building here. That's at ground level. Both the CRU and the residential office lobby spaces access off of this corridor. Intentionally, this has a finer quality of detail and materials with the cedar soffit cladding providing warmth and acting as an acoustic buffer. The side yard light wells again will allow light refracted from the yellow cladding to spill down to the space and animate it throughout the day. These streetscape diagrams show the existing condition at the top, Cleveland Avenue here, the laneway here, and then the projected mud-to density. So again, Cleveland Avenue here, laneway, the blue line, kind of outlining the variety of building heights we could see in 20, 40, 50 years. We recognize that infill development always has its challenges within existing conditions, but we equally value the importance of projecting the building's context into the future 50 or 100 years, so it aligns with the community's OCP and planning vision and maintains its importance. We feel confident we have proposed a building which strikes a balance between the 2. These 3 renderings hopefully give you a clearer understanding of the massing, color, and integration we have tried to design. The Cleveland Avenue facade sits proud towards the street with a simple rhythm of windows and cedar accents, while placing high-quality details and materiality around the storefronts and market alley. The laneway building is intentionally brighter in color and accented with yellow matching windows, railings, and inset soffits that contribute to a playful identity of the laneway streetscape. And the 3rd, lower rendering, highlights the through-block walkway, something we feel has significant implications in the future for how we envision the streets linking these small lot developments throughout the neighborhood.
The main street grid is more or less north-south in Squamish, so these we see almost like a tertiary pedestrian laneway system that could break up those main streets and run the opposite ways. I'll now pass you on to Julian, who is our landscape architect. He'll talk you through the landscape strategy.
So, without seeing the plan in front of you, the opportunities for what I would call kind of a traditional approach to landscape architecture here are somewhat limited, as you might have imagined. So instead, we started to look at different precedents for how we create that sense of identity, and how that identity then relates to the kind of broader historic landscape of what's here. So we really started looking at this idea called supergraphics. So supergraphics were, it's not a new idea, they were basically kind of came out of the movement in the mid-60s. A lady called Barbara Stauffacher at Sea Ranch down in Northern California. And the whole intent of supergraphics was to really kind of create a visual identity that relates to the kind of broader landscape. So we started looking at things like the logging industry, the kind of colours associated with the logging industry, the terms associated, that sort of thing. So that's where these kind of bands of painted colour come from on the ground plane. They then kind of are reinterpreted again into the planters, that kind of yellow, the logging truck, what I call the logging truck yellow, kind of finds itself on bike racks, all that type of stuff. So the whole intent of this is to really kind of create that sense of identity and kind of that relates to, like I said, the kind of broader landscape of what was actually happening in this neighborhood. It's intentionally abstract, it's intentionally not a direct kind of visual link to those things. You know, we want people to kind of do a little bit of their own homework. But the whole idea is to create that kind of sense of playfulness and creativity that we hope will then kind of seep into the uses of the building. So at the back of the building, underneath Undercroft there, we've included a kind of quite playful things like a yellow basketball hoop. You know, we think it might be a nice place to go and shoot some hoops. The whole idea is it's not a professional basketball court, but it's just a nice thing to be able to go out and break out your creative space and go and do that type of thing. We've got screening on the plant screening on the laneway. Again, we've gone for the aspens. We do use other trees, I promise. It's not always aspens. We like the kind of colour and the nature of them, and again, they're a great yellow colour. They look great in the wind. They do all the things that you'd hope a good street tree does in Squamish. They're going to be in powder-coated metal planters along the front, with the intention of reusing those trees at. Oh, we've lost it. With the intention of reusing those trees in the future. And I think that's pretty much it. We've got we've got things like the kind of the rustic log seating. Again, it's a nod to that kind of whole idea of industrial heritage. Similarly with the precast concrete wall to the north on my drawing. The whole idea of that is to kind of illuminate some of this potentially forgotten history of what Squamish is known for. So that's kind of terminology from the logging industry, specific dates, that type of stuff. So again, it's an abstract response, and it's deliberately so, but we think it's an important one.
That's it from us.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will have some questions now. Can I start on your side, Jackie?
Sure. From the public art perspective that staff was seeking our input on, what were the spaces that you were looking for? Like, I love the super graphics. I think that's a great addition. So I'm just wondering where else you were looking for input on.
The one place was the plexiglass, so it's in the courtyard. Do you mind showing? So like, it's kind of, that would be facing internal into the courtyard.
Okay.
Where that basketball hoop would be on, and I think at this point it is yellow. It's
transparent.
It's a transparent yellow. Yeah.
Plexi or sorry, cut you off. Go ahead, Karen.
No, it just seemed kind of an opportunity maybe for something a little bit more, but it was more to, that was just one of the suggestions, and was curious to see what this panel had to say about the amount of public art and if that was sufficient or if this would have been a good space for something further than just the yellow.
If you were looking to use glass as your medium of art, then there's all kinds of opportunities for artistic elements within that using glass. So I'd encourage you that if that's what you were looking for, that was what I was wondering about. And my comment.
Let's wait for
So that was my question: is that space, and the other space was the basketball space. Is that available for artwork as well?
Kind of one and the same. I mean, I think Jules's abstract idea of that yellow graphic does a few things. One, it's an artistic element in itself. And because of, if you're familiar with this area, it's kind of a no man's land. Cleveland terminates and it goes into gravel. So it was a bit of a wayfinder way of trying to draw people down there in a fun way that, you know, honestly is going to be a bit of a temporary street frontage until the bigger picture happens. But it's intentionally quite bold and graphic. I think you're totally right, whether it's plexiglass or laminated glass, there's opportunity to do a laminated frit pattern or artistic pattern, which we're totally open to. I think it's just premature for us to commit to what that looks like. So it's, I think it's artistic enough in a transparent yellow, but it does lend itself to another opportunity. So we've got that layer of the ground plane, the cast in place concrete kind of storyboard, and then taking you to this courtyard, which, I mean, the exciting thing about the courtyard is it's not meant to be just for vehicles. It could be so much on the weekends, right? So I think there's plenty of opportunity for public art or temporary art in this property.
Where's the chain link fence that you were referring to?
It's down the side yards, which we don't really see because things are blocking it. So if you see the properties, like you walk down there, there's quite high fences on either side. So the reality is of trying to do something for security for both the neighbors and us that isn't necessarily permanent, because when another building gets built beside these, there's 0 lot lines. So that's probably going to go away, but something that is, we could possibly squeeze in 8 inches of width, some plants to grow up, and is playful. So it's a PVC coated yellow fence.
We totally like the idea of, you know, it just being chain link fence. You know, Frank Gehry did chain link fence outside of the front of his house many years ago in California, and it was fantastic. You know, chain link fence doesn't have to be this kind of
connotation.
Yeah, you know, it's got connotations of being ugly and all the rest of it, and people want to screen it. But I think, you know, we're proposing a bright yellow one here.
I was just going to say, there's ways to make chain link fence quite artistic.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it's bright yellow to match the kind of different yellows throughout. So I think it's quite pretty. I like it.
Okay, and then the third question was just lighting in those sort of darker spaces and off-alley spaces. What are you considering for lighting?
Hard to see, but it's basically where there's the parking, we'll have soffit downlighting onto the parking. So underneath where the parking is, we'll have strip lighting, downlighting, and then equally through this through-block walkway, we'll have soffit lighting, which you can kind of pick up a bit. So picturing it to be 2x2 cedar slats, and then between those slats you can put like a fluorescent or LED strip. So we have that lit up, and then similarly up on the storefronts on the back building, you know, we do a very simple sconce to demarcate the kind of storefront entrance. So keeping it pretty minimal, mostly soffit lighting. I think it's going to be plenty bright enough from the amount of glass in the storefront to spill out. But yeah, for the most part, all downlight and all soffit light.
Thank you.
Just one question. Is it a pocket door that's between the bathtub and the toilet and sink in the bathroom in the unit?
Can be, and we've been talking about this, what the percentage of residential units trying to make more accessible. So fully accessible is challenging in that configuration, sure. But I know from you in the past, I think we could definitely get there with like the kitchen for a roll-up, and a pocket door would be better given the tight scenario. The bathrooms are really tight, so I'm a little hesitant, and so are the bedrooms. So, but yes, there's the intent.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I don't think I have any questions right now. Just trying to wrap my head around it.
Okay, have you here? Are there any references within the MUD 2 zone for that east-west corridor through the site, or is that something that was kind of?
It's a bit of a past council member has been pushing for it over the years and has actually implemented them with covenants throughout the neighborhood on properties he owns.
Right.
So there is some neat ones. The Cidery's got one going by the side of it. Another property on 3rd, I think, has. So it's kind of flowed from that, and I mean, I've seen it in other streets like Victoria especially. So no, nothing required, but I think it's kind of something the neighborhood knows right now, and if we can implement it. I mean, this was actually Carrie's idea to push it, which was quite a back and forth of how to make it fit. We give up quite a bit of commercial sellable floor area, so but I think it's really going to give those commercial spaces a unique market vibe. And there's always this pushback from ADP of how do we get weather protection, and the 5-meter height, so it's not like a low height, and then that much weather protection, I think is really great. So hopefully it gets replicated and we can start to connect to the west.
Can Carrie follow through on that?
Just quickly add to that is that we do have a schedule in the MUD 2 zone that speaks to, they're called mid-block connections. It's actually also referred to as the spacing in our zone as well. And the intention is as this area rezones, we would be locking those pathways more and more with these into that map. At the time that these guys came through rezoning, they weren't positive on that, and we didn't secure any statutory right-of-way through it, but it is kind of this idea that it's intended for their property use, but could also be used for the public.
Could you speak to the cementitious panel, cementitious, as I say, right?
Sure, yeah.
Panel detail? Just like I really love the way it looks in render.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And it's a brand new system. So we're playing with 2 options. It's a sandwich panel, so you essentially have 2 of these with your foam or mineral wool in the middle, and then another one on the inside, so it's finished surface potentially inside and out. These just came kind of curried this morning, so the color's not quite right, but what we're playing with is a plank look of whether it's board or mimicking the standing seam in a little more playful way, so we can get shadow, and then between the floor plates actually offset them. So it's not like a stripe from 4th floor all the way down to the bottom. We get a bit of play, so it looks random and has some shadow on what otherwise would be quite a blank facade.
So that's coming to you as a wall. It's a whole wall system.
It's coming as a full wall system,
right,
with
so
plumbing and electrical.
Okay, gotcha.
No, it's bolted together system. Really early days, so we're banking quite a bit on it, but it's pretty exciting for the fire rating, the energy performance, and the air tightness.
That's awesome. Yeah. Was there any thought given to, I think lot 12, right beside your site? I know that currently they park at the front of that house. Are they going to retain access, or will they only access from the lane now in this plan?
We've got a public information meeting coming up, so I think that's going to be a point of discussion. We made quite a bit of effort to accommodate. So we kind of left, there's a loading bay there, and we've got to hook into around the existing kind of ditch, which is here. But the hope is we're providing these kind of surface mount spots that could be, I mean, they're non-conforming parking right now, but I think it's a good gesture for neighborliness to give them a place that's safe to park, that's both safe for the street and in and out. So that was the idea. This is kind of, technically we only have to improve half of Cleveland Avenue, like our side of the right-of-way, but that was our proposal to the district, and I think that's going to be a bit of the focus moving forward after this. Yeah, with really what's appropriate, what's the input from the neighbors, how do we accommodate all those pieces, the loading bay, the stormwater management, when really half the street is not a street. So that was the idea.
I'll just add to say that this isn't locked in yet, the street design. So as Chris alluded to, there's still part of the review process, and it goes into servicing agreement really when it gets locked in, which is after the development permit. But I will say that as they're existing parking, they are parking on district property. So the perpendicular is likely not achievable for that unit, for that plot.
At the front.
Yeah, I think that unit actually they access a parking spot internal to the property, but from that.
They've got a drive through all the way to the back. Yeah.
Oh, do they? So they can access the lane?
I think so. Okay. They've got like pull apart gates on both sides.
Right. and I can't read my own writing, so, oh, there we go. I got it. So you mentioned in your, that massing diagram you do at the beginning, which I thought was really, yeah, that one, super useful, and I think it's great to see that thought process in these presentations, so that's a comment, but I'll stop there. You say that you need more roof overhang to meet your PV needs. Was there any thought in exploring more of an overhang for that roof structure to meet that requirement?
Yeah. So basically the allowable overages over height within MUD 2 are guardrails, staircases and elevators, which have overruns. Overhangs isn't something that's detailed in that, it outlines, so it's kind of this gray area like Carrie said. I know from past few years on design panel and seeing all this project, there's this kind of balance of rooftop decks are great, but it rains 9 months of the year, 8 months of the year, so where's the furniture go, and what's that balance between sufficient coverage? And then we also layer in the idea of PV, so ideally the whole thing would be PV, but that has, I think in massing that starts to look, you see that from the street quite a bit more. So this was really us trying to strike a balance of having a 4 to 5 foot overhang, 50% offset for our mechanical needs. We think we can get that up a little bit maybe with some efficiencies in the system. And then I also think it's pretty crucial to cover those side yard light wells. So those don't become just kind of dang, really wet spaces. Those side yard terraces, which you can picture them to be drip through bar grade, so light comes through and there's a visual connection all the way down the ground, are somewhat protected. But yeah, we thought this was a good balance. Our structure aligned, so it works with our panel system. There's kind of 4 things at play there. But yeah, we're sensitive to it. It reads as another story, but what I don't like with the rooftop deck access, like formally, architecturally, is you end up with a little tube in the middle like a donut. So just trying to find a balance between proportions for the building, weather protection, and then layering in this ambition of trying, how do we get to net zero in the next 10, 15, 20 years? We have to embrace it. So that's been a 5-part conversation amongst all the people involved.
Awesome, thanks.
Thanks. Jenna?
Just adding to that conversation, can you speak a bit more about the roof use, the layout of it, and how you see it functioning?
It's probably shaded by this, but I think you guys have it in your package. Basically, the laneway facing, which is the west facing roof deck, will be communal, so that'll be for some of the commercial tenants and some of the residential units, and then the west facing one most likely will be private for the top 2 residential units. There's a bit of an overarching theme, mostly coming from kind of Mark's health and wellness and rep tech industry, that it could have a idea of a wellness deck. So the idea of a sauna and a hot tub and herb planters and urban bees is a great, how do we pack this in and have it be both for the commercial, I think, and the residential. So that's the idea. Fairly simple rooftop deck. It's not a huge square footage, but definitely have some planters up there and some of these things layered into it.
Have your team looked at the options for the wall? The walls look very thick. Was there opportunity for those walls to have some transparency on the sides that are holding out the...
These walls on the side?
Yeah.
We have looked at it. It becomes challenging because then you're jumping between what is like a panelized system and inevitably steel post beam system.
Yeah.
And how those connect. Then you deal with different waterproofing connections. So the system's benefit is all the bolting systems are internal and they're panels. So, and the great thing is they can have 25-foot span, quite a thin profile. So in some sense, if we go to a post and beam, it gets quite thick. I think my pushback to kind of, and that's fine, it's been a discussion is really the side yard implications. I thought this, bringing that light well all the way up to the roof and seeing the thinness of the roof, I thought was a good middle ground. But yeah, the structure is quite aligned and the building's pretty organized top to bottom for a lot of reasons. So we did explore it though.
Sounds good. Julian, could you speak to, you have what you're calling the concrete story wall.
Yep.
Could you speak more about that?
Yep. We don't really know what it is.
Great.
It's a concrete wall. It's an in situ concrete wall, and the general idea would be that it has cast in place events, dates, that type of thing on it. So it's again, it's kind of like it's an abstract way of representing kind of the historic process of what's happened in Squamish. So we were kind of thinking, you know, it didn't have logging terminology, it would have specific dates associated with those things. And it's really kind of, it's just a nod to kind of the broader landscape, really.
Yeah, and what's its general size?
It runs
the whole length of the
whole
whole block walkway.
Yeah.
So it'll be
So
on the
it's-
inside of one of these
Again,
panels.
it's kind of guiding you down
Yeah.
that kind of interstitial space.
Completely different question. The street trees, is there
Yep.
any silver cells or structural soil or anything?
They're all going in planters because, again, the streetscape isn't set right now. So the streetscape standard isn't kind of, you know, we're not doing the normal Squamish streetscape standard because we're not there yet. But the idea is that basically the trees go into large planters, so they're 1200 mil diameter, 1200 mil high, a bit higher than what's shown in the rendering.
Yeah.
And then we would hope to reuse the trees when the streetscape is set.
Perfect, thanks.
Cool. This may be a silly question, but why yellow?
Logging trucks.
Yeah, we were looking at images of like what is the history of this site, and it doesn't have a super inspirational site, but it has a definite, you know, you look at the finning truck, the Caterpillar truck, and we both latched onto that. And I think we wanted to see it. You know, at the end of Cleveland, you wanted to see something bright and playful.
Yeah. I love the sort of shapes on the ground, and you know they're very visible in plan when we're planning these things out. But sometimes it can be lost when you're just walking and there's 10 cars in there and stuff. Was there any thought put into having that shape or that sort of run up the building, so transfer from the ground?
I think that's kind of the Lightwell idea, those side cuts. So the effort of going all the railings and the window frames and the cladding are in that similar yellows. So yeah, that was my way to tie those in, that it's actually running up the building. Yeah. So from down Cleveland, you see it, you walk in. And I think there is going to be a really beautiful play of light in that through block walkway throughout the day. So not on the north side, but on the south side, we're going to there's another little court which kind of cuts into the middle of that ground floor commercial space too. You'll see on the site plan. So I'm hoping there's a few different layers of yellow that permeates the whole site. And then again, I mean, even in the trees and the planters, there's another layer of hitting you with the yellow. So yeah, so there's this little court kind of in there too where the yellow will wash down.
Okay. Just staying on that plan at the moment, the Class A bike spaces, they're only accessible from the commercial unit?
There's one or two in this commercial unit, but we've actually elected to put them up on the second floor plan, the mezzanine plan, so right here. And that's because I find in our experience, like a true Class A stall that you actually want to lock your $10,000 mountain bike in is better off served somewhere that's more secure. Okay. So we elect, and spatially we're just really tight. Actually, with the latest revision, originally this was Class A locked biking with a bike wash at the ground level. Yeah. And just because we actually upped, we had the second floor being residential units initially, and we went back to this 50-50 split. So our garbage requirements went up quite a bit, and that was the only logical place, I think, to separate commercial and residential garbage. So yeah. Class A is on that nice level.
And then residential garbage, is that taken to Cleveland, because it seems like it's in the heart of the...
All to the lane at this point. Yeah, we've got to engage with GFL another round now that this has changed. We're just working with some new requirements that the district's using to set out what size bins and how many bins and stuff. So I think it's going to be another layer, but I think everything will go to the lane most likely.
Okay. Yeah. And then the main entry, you go in on that side, and then you got the stairs. That's a step. That's a secondary exit coming down through that sort of.
This one?
Sorry, to the left of the garbage.
This, yeah, that would be the exit stair coming out from above.
Okay. Any thoughts about how that dead end, underused space might be
treated?
Yeah.
Not a huge amount. I think at one point we kind of, it was a bike wash area, and maybe carrying the yellow in there or something. But really, I think it is going to be not somewhere we invest a ton. But I think color's a fun way. We could probably do something in there. I mean, the idea of the ground plane colors going through there.
Yeah. Okay. And then the white standing seam. Have you done any sort of, not tests, but what's your understanding of how it holds dirt you know, dust.
It's a constant. I'm a black and white person for a few reasons. One, I think it's really prevalent, and like you look at the Chief, it's black and white. And you look at our mountains, it's green, blue, and white. So that, and then modern architecture, it's quite timeless. I find it actually looks cleaner than beiges and browns and tones that hold dirt more. I mean, you think about a car, like what's the best car to have that you never need to wash? It's a white car. So I actually find with the pre-coated metal only, I wouldn't do it on like wood or something, but the pre-coated metal I think actually looks cleaner over time. It's slight off-white, but I keep pushing for it. I think it's really great in our climate to have that contrast, and you got to clean and maintain a building no matter what. But I think it's more about the metal being a really good repeller of dirt.
Okay. Last one, you've increased the commercial space, which is great, but you've like drastically reduced the commercial parking.
Yeah.
And so are there strategies for car share, or how are all people that work here going to park and have visitors park?
Yeah. We've got extra Class B stalls, bike parking on kind of the street is one thing we want to encourage, and then I think the overflow parking. We're always trying to work with the community and the district to find a way to make car share something that makes sense. Right now there isn't kind of an adoption with the district to give us an offset for the required stalls, which we understand because it's a small community and there's not that uptick. Our first project, we do have a commercial car share, so it's an electric car that's owned by the strata and meant for the commercial tenants. So, I mean, the hopeful would be you can fit 2 smart cars in there, and that's for commercial tenants, and people walk and bike, and then when they run their errands, they can use that. But yeah, the vice of these small lots is parking. I mean, it is incredibly tight to work this in. Yeah. So there's no way around that, unfortunately.
Okay. Yep. That's my question. Thanks.
You have a really lovely slide with the streetscape. It's not in this package.
No, no.
Yeah. Okay, so the building next to you, which is the small house right now, just walk me through the zoning. So it's 0 lot line. So technically,
1-2 is 0 lot line, yeah.
So technically, that could be rezoned and go 0 lot line as well against your light well.
Yeah.
Up to 4 or 5 stories.
Up to what we are. Unless it could do a CE too, its own zone. So you can rezone to whatever you want. MUD 2 is the suggested zoning, something that's been vetted by the public, but the district didn't blanket rezone. So pretty much every neighborhood either has to build to light industrial or rezone to something. So yes, it definitely could.
Okay, and then the through block connection.
Yeah.
Just because it is so close to Vancouver, like you're 1 lot in, did you think about putting it on the other side, or was there a reason why it was located on the side closest to the street?
A little bit, because it's closer to Cleveland, so initially just to make people walk not as far and alleviate a bit of the influence and concerns from the neighbor, the single family house there, of having less sidewall. Yeah, we did look at it. Flipping it helped us a bit. This way helped us a bit with our proximity to the fire hydrant. So our FTC connection is on this little corner of the building, and that keeps us within our distance to the fire hydrant. So there's a few things of why it's there.
And then I'm just a little bit lost on the back screening from the alley of the parkade, or what is the material there? In one of the renderings it looks...
This?
No, on the bottom. Is there a material
There's
there?
nothing on the bottom. There was at one time, so hopefully you don't have a leftover drawing in there, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
But there was originally garage doors that matched this kind of sun privacy screening for the commercial units, but that went away with some input from the district wanting that through block to always remain open.
Okay.
But we kept the kind of metal screen veil on those back units, because in reality it's just a pretty rough laneway right now, and I think it's a good thing to have for lots of reasons.
Okay. And then security of the through block, and then the exit in. Are you guys at all concerned about that?
We were, which is why initially it had gates, or the potential, like a nice way to open up a market alley on the front. But the push from, I think, the district and probably public perception is, if it's public, it should be open and facilitate that. So yeah, initially that was how it was. And I think it still could have been nice, it's just a different optic. So right now it's all open.
You looked at a lot of precedent images from places like East Berlin, where you've got these interstitial alleyways that cut through buildings, and they were all pretty much open. There's a kind of I guess a sweet spot between kind of feeling slightly intimidated and not wanting to explore, and then kind of feeling like, oh, what is down there? And that's kind of partially what the graphics are all doing. It's actually the whole intent is to draw people through into that space. So with the idea being that the more people there, the more eyes you have in the space, the safer it is.
I think it's going to be quite bright too, with the height.
Can I just add that because they're putting commercial in the rear, we also needed that through block walkway to be clear for fire access, because fire can only come onto Cleveland. There's not a turnaround in the laneway, so it was a fire access as well.
I think it's one of those perceived things, and you never know until you do, but we want people to take ownership of the street and the courtyard, and I think the mix of tenants is a really good thing. It's not one big tenant who's closed. I think people are going to be living and working here at different times of the night. It's kind of the charm. I think the cidery is just to the west too, directly, so I think it'll be a well-connected walk. Yeah, and that's why we put the entrance doors intentionally not on Cleveland. So the entrance door to that front commercial is off to that walkway. So at night, if it's a restaurant or something, that'll be quite active.
What's the size of the elevator?
It's small right now. The recent kind of revision added that second floor office. So it went from a limited use elevator to something that's going to need to be bigger, because we're going to have different tenants on that second floor. So we acknowledge it's got to get wider. There's a bit, there's space for it. We've explored it. It's not going to be a freight elevator. We don't see this being, it's going to be offices on the second floor. I think the laneway one will be smaller kind of makers, so there's not big deliveries we're thinking. But yeah, crunched by size, you'll see it in the floor plans going up. They're really limited, but bigger than what's shown for sure.
Sometimes the ceiling height in the elevator helps as well. But
yeah, we can go higher in the ceiling height, because right now we're 10-foot ceilings, so we can have taller to fit things up and in. But yeah, initially that's like a lula, so it's meant for just a couple floors.
Okay. When you were describing this Cleveland Avenue, were you contemplating doing off-site landscaping there? Is that something you'll be taking on? Or?
Some we have to on the street frontage, and then I think some of it is in the discussion of how do we deal with stormwater management on the street. So I've proposed, right now, if you've been down there, there's the dike trail that kind of goes up, and there's a berm on the left-hand side. So I think that's probably an opportunity of a way to deal with surface drainage and grade things away so it's safe and naturally gets encapsulated there.
I was thinking more on your side of the street in front of the single-story house.
Yeah, we're proposing that's where some of the stormwater goes into like an infiltration swale there.
Yeah.
It's a ditch right now along Vancouver Street, so it's trying to kind of marry the two, when in reality we don't have a full streetscape with curbs and there's nothing to the south. So we don't have a civil engineer yet, so it's a little premature, and I think the district's going to have a lot of say in what they feel comfortable with too. But that was my proposal, that we have opportunities to kind of marry the two in a, in a temporary way, because in 10 years this might be a major thoroughfare to the oceanfront. So as we've seen in some, so I think it's got to be safe, it's got to manage water, and it's got to draw people in over the next kind of 5 to 10 years.
Okay. And just curious on the garbage and recycling zones, it looks like an awful lot. Is it? That's actually.
It's a lot.
What is that?
It's coming from
required
Richmond, which has a new guideline, quite a helpful spreadsheet. You kind of plug in your square footage and your uses, and it tells you how much you need. Initially, we just had the laneway one. Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing discussion. We'd always like to think we're probably going to hopefully hold some of the commercial space in this as owners. So you know, we're always trying to facilitate smarter garbage habits, but inevitably, just like parking, we're kind of slave to the infrastructure a bit. But it is quite a bit, yeah. I mean, this could be a restaurant out front, so they tend to have more garbage. So I think it's a good idea to plan for it. It's still tight, it's not an ideal in and out. But on these small lots, like there's just, between the parking and that, you'd lose all your parking if you did a larger structure into the lane. So yeah, it is quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. That's all from me for questions. And we can, unless anyone else has any extra, Jackie?
Yes, I thought about the height variance for the rooftop patio connects to the elevator question. Is that part of this application? Have you designed for it?
Yeah, we have. So it's funny because it's not a height variance in elevation. It's almost like a square footage thing. So we have, if you look at the roof plan, it's as we propose it, it's 180 square feet of roof, all covered in PV cells. If we did just the staircase and elevator extension, which is not a height, wouldn't need a height variance, and say it had a 2-foot standard overhang, that would be 80 square feet. So we're asking for 100 more square feet to allow us to support some of this photovoltaic offset that we're trying to push and have a conversation about. So it's not the height that would change, it's the extension. Yeah, and I think what's always important in these rooftop spaces, like covered space is so valuable for tenants. Your furniture, your barbecue. Otherwise, rooftop decks can be really crappy in a multifamily scenario. And we've intentionally not done like balconies or insets like that. So that is the building's social space. So I think it has to be well curated and be proportional and be good architecture. So that it's hard to phrase. I mean, we're gonna have to work on it to council, but it's more of a square footage variance in height, not a height. And we're happy to bring it down right now. I think I've got 10, 11 feet, expecting the elevator overrun to be that. But if we can get an elevator with a lower overrun, we're happy to keep it lower.
And have you considered the fire code in terms of having barbecues up on those levels?
Yeah, no issue.
Okay.
Just one quick question. In the renderings, your concrete is light gray or white with the yellow on it, and in here, in the drawings, it's black.
It's intended to be black on the sides. The inset in here is yellow.
Just not the concrete paneling, the asphalt.
Yes, you're right.
Is
it asphalt.
It's asphalt with the yellow on it?
Yeah, and for a few reasons. One, the temporary nature. Two, it takes paint better.
Yeah.
And I kind of like the contrast. So yeah, you're right. That was me photoshopping yesterday. I was like, oh, could I take on making those black?
Yeah.
Because these are outsourced halfway, and then I did some yesterday rendering. So I did not get to turning those black. But good.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
But it'll be a smooth surface, regardless.
Okay. Thanks. So we'll move to comments, and we'll start with Jackie.
So in terms of public art, the glass panels, you're planning to make them yellow, so consider how yellow then falls, as light falls through it, how it falls on people and the ambience of the room. That may be something you may want to reconsider.
I love it. That's great, I think.
Well, there are tones of yellow in glass that are great and others that are not. So just consider that. And if you then consider that, maybe consider other types of artistic glass forms that you can put into that space. The white space, I wasn't sure where that was for.
The back building?
Is that for the public art space too, again? No?
You mean Carrie's comment? No, I think she was just asking for EDP's opinion on white as a cladding color tone relative to usually dirt maintenance is the kind of pushback. So
well, I'd encourage color to keep in with all your other color bits.
Well, all this is all yellow. So everywhere you see an inset, the railing, the window frames, and then the soffit and the sidewalls are all matching yellow. Okay. So it's kind of cloaked in this nice standing seam metal, which has shadow, and then everything inset is colorful yellow, with the exception on the little storefronts kind of facing the courtyard have a black door and a black signage with the light. So it definitely is picking up on the yellow. Yeah, it'll be a bright, colorful, funky little building for sure.
And just to pick up on the comment that you take the super graphic up one of the walls to make that connection. I think that would be very exciting and give that much more exciting to, not to disturb your neighbors, but on the other side, the Cleveland side possibly, to give it a bit more appeal than a solid black from an artistic perspective. And just, again, the comment about the elevator, that it'd be larger if you're going to have a rooftop patio and people moving hot tubs and furniture and things like that.
Those will be a crane. Unless it's a blow up. But yeah, no, definitely, point noted. It's a tough balance, but we're not going to end up with a huge one, just we cannot fit it, but it will be.
Understandable.
I think the height one's a good suggestion from John, so definitely.
And then again, using the chain link fence as another form of art and artistic expression.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so my instincts initially of the kind of color lines that you've got on your paving is good, but for somebody with visual impairment, it's a bit of a nightmare because you're being led in all sorts of directions. I think if that was actually wrapped up the building, it would be even worse for somebody with visual impairment. So just to be sort of cognizant that having some distinction between your wall and paving so that somebody's not going to run into the wall. And you might, you may want to consider having a different color or something that just leads somebody through that space, or some light in, there's a lot of people who are quote unquote blind, but they have some vision and they're relying on that contrast to guide them. Just a thought. Also, you mentioned Richmond, and Richmond requires for all of their townhouses and apartments aging in place requirements. I mean, basically it's sort of levers, and the other thing is just backing in the walls in the bathroom. So around the bathroom, you might want to consider putting in some backing just for future grab bars, because these could be apartment for somebody too.
I think that's actually one of our target markets is kind of elderly people who want a larger floor plan.
Yeah.
So I think we could get 75% of them, the levers, a wheel-in space in the kitchen, desk, lower countertop height. The shower is always the hard one.
Yeah, but some people can be somewhat ambulatory, but having a grab bar is essential. Yes. And then just whether or not you can get a pocket door into that bathroom would allow that extra space, even if you don't have turnaround space, it allows you to get into the bathroom door. Sure. But otherwise, I think it's great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for coming in, guys. I took the drawings home and, for whatever reason, just had a hard time following what was going on, so that's why I didn't have any questions earlier on. I think it's pretty awesome you guys are going for step code 4. I'd be super interested to see what these panels look like when they show up. I've never heard or seen anything of them, so yeah, it'd be cool to see that. As far as the rear, so just to touch on the things that you guys, or the planning department was touching about, height variance, rooftop patio, and the PV arrays, I think that's pretty reasonable reason for that one. And then the rear building siding, Chris, that's the same color as your place, is that
lighter?
Lighter?
It's that paint chip there, so it's almost like a taupey white.
Right, so it's not the galvan, it's the actual chip on it. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's close. It's a bit lighter than mine.
Yeah.
Mine's, they all show dirt, but I actually find white's quite good.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the contrast between the main building. Yeah, I think it's cool. I think you guys are trying to do something different, and I like the fact that energy efficiency is at the top of the list. So.
Thanks, guys. Great presentation. My comments are, the first one's for planning staff. I would encourage you to keep formalizing those mid-block connections, because I think that's really cool. And if we look at like the Portland model of, I think, 100-foot streets or 100-foot sections, if that's what that zone becomes, I think that would be really great. And it kind of already is with what's existing, but if we build there, let's encourage that. I think it's got a really good story of public art within this project, and is integrating a number of elements, which I think will be beneficial for this project and for kind of that surrounding area, and defining how it starts to build and hopefully how it attracts more artisans to these units. Price is always a key component to that, but I'll let you guys cover that one. I'll echo Mike's comments. Like, really interested to see these panelized systems, and if they do what they say they do, that seems to be the future. On the alley side, I'll just point out that our office is a couple blocks or a couple units over from this, and it's very dusty. And so I don't know if there's an opportunity to improve that alley
We're paving it, so
okay.
yeah, so we pave from our lot to the corner.
Yeah, that'll have a huge benefit.
And then it's got this bike lane kind of shared. What's it called? The
Wooner
Wool store. Yeah.
Wooner Street. Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, it'll be big.
Awesome. So even with that, the dustiness, and that's going to have a huge improvement for that whole area. But I would support that color cladding as well. I quite like the modern aesthetic that those light colors bring. I think you've got a smart approach to how you're treating the Cleveland frontage, because I think the idea that having some ability to adapt as things may change that area or not is wise, especially with the proposed development that may be coming down the pipe for that area. I would prefer that your approach to integrating those colors from the yellows within the inlays there are reflected in the building. I think it's not in your face. It's a bit more elegant, and I think it does the trick with what you're trying to do. I wouldn't bring that treatment necessarily up the whole building. And yeah, otherwise I look forward to the sweet fly around you guys will prepare.
We didn't do it, we got it, we just didn't show it.
Yeah, making the rest of us look bad with that one.
I echo a lot of comments. I really appreciate the energy efficiency of this building. My one only hope would be somehow to toot your horn, and I don't know how that would happen, but I think it's a really good story and it's a really good ambition, and it would be great if more buildings followed suit and how that could be communicated in some way, even just through your process of sharing the building with the public before it gets built. I think would be really important. On that note, I think the variance is really acceptable. I think your rationale for having this photovoltaics outweighs all the other concerns that someone might have about the area of that extra space. It's a really good story, really important. With regards to the roof, I would just encourage you to do, if you haven't already, a sun study, just because it is quite heavy, just making sure that those spaces are getting some sun and it's not going to turn into a darker space. So playing with that a little bit. The rear light, I think it will work really well, and the inset of the yellow is going to give it that really fun pop and playfulness that I don't, if you're not concerned about the materials, I'm certainly not concerned. In terms of the super graphics, so fun, super playful. I think it just adds so much to it, and paint can go so far and make a space really, really cool and playful. So good move on that one. Equally, the concrete wall, I'm really excited to see what that turns into. Just a really nice modern way to tell some really old stories. Chain link seems a good approach, good color. I don't see any concerns with that one. With the street trees, while they're temporary, I would encourage a tree that's a bit more robust, more of a street-like tree. And if possible, I'd get them in the ground plane just to allow them to capitalize on the rainwater, even though they're temporary. More green, I don't know. So it's hard because the site is so dense, it's really hard to get green in, and I don't want to say put in climbers for the sake of getting more in, but
we looked at it and
you're looking at it, and I don't think it doesn't want to be PC and
But up the light walls, I think could be really amazing. Right?
Yeah.
So if we have, I think we do have a bit of space there. Would be the best.
Yeah, if it works, that's great, and if it gets too PC, then I mean, you know what you're doing. This is completely subjective, but you spoke about the history of the site and the reference to Caterpillar. And I personally find that yellow might not have the longevity that we might hope for. And when I think of caterpillar yellow and I look at some of Julian's images of the aspen and the light rack, it has a bit more of a richness to it, and it's completely subjective, but I would encourage you to just play with the yellows that are out there and which ones.
I think we're going to have 3 or 4 variations,
Yeah.
like more pastel-y, so
Yeah.
I think that was just a starting point of what is color that has something we could play with.
Of course,
But
absolutely.
I totally agree.
And it's totally subjective.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a great point.
But thanks so much. Great.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic project, very comprehensive, and a lot of uses and activations in a very compact form, which I think we kind of underestimate when we look at a plan like this, because I can imagine it's been pretty tricky to plan out and combine all those uses into that space. I feel the height is supportable, the variance. I'd be wary that some other applicants would try to achieve that and then include more indoor space into those exclusions, as opposed to just saying it's for solar panels. So it's just a thought on that. I would suggest you maybe reconsider that long exit from that stairwell, because I just think that that's going to become an area for bad activities or something in there. And yeah, I think the white is supportable as well. I think it provides a little bit of calmness and contrast. I love how Squamish has a DP area that actually references funky in it. I mean, that's like, you don't get that anywhere else, I don't think. But there is a case for not being too funky. So if an applicant was to make that 4 different colors, then it would just become a little bit too much. So I think the white is sort of thoughtful funky, if that's my phrase. And then the chain link, I really like the chain link. Maybe if it was just a normal chain link and then the yellow stripes came up it painted or something like that, that would be a nice way to tie it in, as opposed to just a solid yellow or something. Other than that, great.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you've done. You've done some interesting, you have some interesting moves here. I'm not sold on the yellow. I think of all those little black flies in the hatch, and they're all over. They're gonna love that. I'm a bit concerned about this light well. I like the move that you've done by carrying the color up there, but I think if you're looking to the future, that could be covered by the neighboring building.
I think it would still function well from just experience in like Chinatown historically. Like they used to carve these light wells for exactly that reason. So that's where I'm kind of bringing it from historically, and they still function really well. So those would be the bathrooms and the kitchen front of those spaces. Maybe the balcony becomes not as a nice place to sit, but I think they're still great for ventilation, passive ventilation across the building. So definitely point noted. Yeah, I've seen way smaller in Chinatown, so we made them quite big intentionally.
Yeah, I think the light is fine. I think how you're transitioning the site color and those bold moves into that area is maybe not the right spot, because it could, then you don't see it from the street, right? If the site next door does get built up. But the light coming through will still reach in there, like I understand that, and ventilation. I don't know how that gets resolved, but I'm struggling with the streetscape. It's a box. I think I see you've done some punched windows. I think you could maybe break that up instead of it being like super horizontal. So it's just reading like a 4-story box basically. Like if you turn those and brought them down vertically, just to sort of give it, I don't know, some articulation, or change the color within the windows instead of black on black. And then the rooftop, I again struggle with that. We are seeing this on lots of projects, townhomes. It's becoming this like Squamish vernacular, this like block on top of all of our buildings. And I know it relates to the style that you're doing here. I just wonder if there's some way to make it less, heavy and sort of in your face. I feel like it needs to be toned down. Maybe it's a lighter color. I don't know. I think without the rooftop, it would be, I would probably buy into it a bit more. I think the through lane is great, but same comments. If you could just bring the doors so that they all face onto that laneway, so there's no little hidey holes for people, so you can look down and see what's happening. And then just circulation on the back, parking, just getting those cars in and out against that glazing and around the column down that, back down to the laneways is pretty tight. So that's it.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to get into a little more in-depth conversation with you about light wells.
Sure.
If two buildings come next door, which they likely will, what's to stop them from building zero lot line and completely enclosing these spaces in?
Well, some of the DPA guidelines push developments to relate to adjacent properties. So one discussion was both in the courtyard move by breaking this building up, we're encouraging neighboring sites to do similar things in the courtyard. They could equally do a similar kind of responsible architectural move to the light well, but you can never control your neighbor. Nor is this going to be like this for 100 years? We don't know. So no, I don't think we can.
So if I was a really nasty developer, I would come along and buy that site, plan for a building that's zero lot line, and then come with my hands out to you saying, or the strata, and saying, hey, I can do this.
Let's say stop it, go do what you
Yeah.
want. You know, like,
well, no, it makes those are no longer light wells or balconies. They are
I could show you some
interior
amazing,
rooms.
I think in my head what they are, which is not, they're tertiary rooms, right? So you're in a small bathroom, it's great to have a window even if it's small, even if it's diffuse glass. So I firsthand seen them function for that purpose when we have zero lot line and a brick wall right there. But I just can't control.
So I guess the suggestion is that if you're actually bringing air down from the top of the building, then you're achieving a light well on your own. But if you're relying on the sidewall of the building, as is shown here, and someone builds zero lot line, there's no way for air to get down into those. They are truly enclosed spaces. Yeah, so as you rely on their functionality to be air spaces, might not be forever for someone who purchases one of those.
Yeah.
It's
unless we had it open at the roof, eventually we could look at.
Yeah, you'd have to push them back and have your balconies so that they're away from zero lot line, so you do get a flow through of air, you know, at least.
Yeah. No, that's good.
So, I have a lot of experience with light wells as I've owned and worked in Gastown for many years. So.
Yeah.
John, could I just make a comment?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really valid point, and as we are going through a zoning bylaw update right now, we've just initiated, I think that is something that we could probably look at as a condition for zero lot line buildings. If they're going against another building that has a lightweight, maybe there's an opportunity for zoning to address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, with all that said, I really like what you've done there, just the practicality of what happens.
It's a good point, because the default is in the floor plan, you either, if that's 2 units, you have only a window at one side, a window at the other, or it's 1 unit like we have, but you have no ventilation in your bathroom. So it's why we end up with those shotgun floor plans in typical urban models, right? But yeah, all good points. Solution, not sure. And then the rooftop one, there might be some way for us to ensure ventilation.
Yeah.
Skylight there or something.
It actually brings me to my fairly firm recommendation that you actually kill those for the commercial space, particularly for the ground floor level.
We can't because it's ties into lot coverage. So that light well has to go all the way down, or it's interior space and we're above our lot coverage.
Yeah. Perhaps the building needs to be pulled back on one side so that it makes it up, but
it's got such a big ripple effect.
Yeah.
We looked at it for sure.
Yeah.
And I've seen it like building science wise, that you have another roof there that catches water and stuff thrown out windows, and it's got kind of other implications. So I get it.
Well, just on the main floor level, you're creating a bottleneck, which you might find you know, a tenant who really needs sort of the space to work around down there.
Or two units was the other one, because if this really is small, eclectic, CRU space, which is why we have those two doors, could easily be divided into two. That's the idea. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see that. But you might find someone that could work through, and you know, that ground floor next door is very likely going to be a zero lot line, and then that basically becomes enclosed space, which makes it interior footprint, which ups your interior size space. And so it's not an attempt to cheat using the future, but it's just functionally just really not going to be desirable for, it's not going to get used very much for what it is. So better to keep the space open if you can. Yeah, on the elevator, you're going to go bigger. That would be great. Slightly bigger. Doesn't have to be freight size. I need to comment about parking. I really like your solution and what you've done. This whole thing makes a lot of sense, but there needs to be some kind of plan in the area for off-site handling parking. Something needs to come into place to make these types of developments actually viable. Because if everyone did what you're doing here, all through the whole area, there would be a full jam up for parking. So they're hopefully it's something else that we can figure out as a community. But for this particular development, I think it does make a lot of sense. My comment for parking is funny how we get these requests for relaxations to commercial allotments of parking, when actually it's probably the residential that could be relaxed, because I know a lot of people that don't have cars just ride bikes, but commercial relies heavily on having vehicular access for customers. You never know what different types of tenants may come and go in the future. Some may need cars a lot more than others, so really relaxing allotments for commercial is the wrong sort of position it takes.
This isn't the same as Cleveland, so it's a trade-off of buyouts versus what you provide. So it's a little more constrained than the Cleveland Avenue strip, so we're providing more. And then the flip side that has come up in other presentations is we're meeting the requirements, but how those stalls are used might be better served in the future for the laneway ones to be for visitors, to commercial, right? I'm not saying every commercial tenant is going to drive a car so they could use it. So I think there's some operational realities too that might help the optics of this. I show it all full of cars when in reality, hopefully, nobody parks there except visitors. It would be great. And we have a car share for the residents or something. So I think there's probably some lessons to be learned on the small lots as we go forward.
I'll just add quickly that it's not in the report, but it would be to council, is that their cash only contribution is $100,000 or just over, and that cash contribution goes into a fund to support community parking, which is the direction we're trying to go so that we can accommodate these small lots and they're not overburdened with parking. So we are trying to address.
Yeah, it's a bigger picture.
It is.
Yeah, and the one we always push for like ADP, and I'd love your comments to go to council, is we prefer 20-30,000 of that to be an offset with car share. So we provide a car, electric charging, and that's for commercial tenants, and that's our small scale solution. Let's take half the buyout money and put it on site so we can see the benefits, and the other half can go in a coffer. Because I don't think a parkade is going to be the 50-year solution. I'd rather it go towards public transport, and then we have some immediate use for. So I think as a group, it'd be great if you guys comment on that. So when we bring it forward in this project and every project, there's some context.
Yeah.
Everyone's got
it.
Well, just to be open with that is that there is a car share proposed in an adjacent property, car share like lot that we secured as part of the Plaza Junction Park. So that was the rationale, is that it was within 100 meters, so we didn't feel the car share would be available to that community. But it didn't need to be on that property.
But for instance, we could easily have 4 residential units here, right? Which would be nice 1 2-bedroom units, but we can't, because we can't fit the parking, and there's no other loophole. Like we always refer to Vancouver, which is a totally different urban context, but there is a 5-to-1. So you provide a car share with a car, it offsets 5. So we would do 4 residential units, smaller units. So it is a bigger discussion and it factors into all these things, but it's got a really, on these small lots, it's got bigger implications than it does in something like Junction Park or, hundreds of units and multi-level parking.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. Okay, anyone else? Any other last minute comments?
I have one more comment. It's just to do with the bike rack location in the front of the building. I would just encourage you to stagger them, so maybe you have one, though it would potentially affect your sight lines down your walk-through, just so that if somebody's parking with a van with a side lift, is that just myself? That you can actually...
Nice van, by the way.
Yeah, you can actually get it out. Because...
So put them on the division lines?
So you could have one there, but just maybe move the street tree over, so you're going to have some spaces in between the bike parking and the street to walk through or put a lift in. That's
okay. Okay, fantastic. We'll move on to the recommendation. And I'll read them once again. That the advisory design, recommendation A is that the advisory design panel supports the project and does not need to see this project return. Recommendation B is that the advisory design panel supports the project in general and would like the applicant to work with staff to resolve the following recommendations. C is that the advisory design panel supports the project in general, would like the applicant to resolve following recommendations and return to present the project to advisory design panel. And D is that the advisory design panel does not support the project for the following reasons. Any suggestions for which item?
B.
Anyone else? And the comments that we would put forward?
I think C, there was a few pretty serious comments.
I agree, I believe C's, because there's some issues that need to be dealt with.
Okay. I think we'll start with B and vote on that. Assuming that there's, and if you would like, we can highlight, if that goes through, then we can highlight what those specific comments are, but can we have someone move for B? A second? And all in favor? That's 6-5. All against? 2 against.
Can I have the names be opposed? That's okay?
Yeah. Jackie and Tanis? Okay, so it's B. And any comments on specific highlighted concerns?
I think massing, the roof, it's on this. So. I guess generally just massing, articulation. I think the light well is a good move, but it doesn't really work if there's development next door.
Street front. That's one of your comments. The window line and
yeah, articulation on Cleveland. Circulation, parking.
Parking.
Yeah.
Parking. Okay, Sarah? Does everyone else agree with that?
Well, I guess on the massing point, and maybe this is something that you can speak to, this wall system that you're using and this net zero approach, what's the balance there with articulating the facade versus that? And what, like, obviously there's a trade-off with the existing systems that we have in place to go with that type of energy efficient and hitting that stuff. So did you explore some articulation in the facade along Cleveland? Did you know, is it possible with this wall system, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's this wall system or not, I am one to support more calm building street frontages. So as we start to form a street of 10 or 12 of these, that we have a nice clean, that was kind of the precedence, you know, like European background for me. We have some organization and we don't have chaos with people's bikes, and you know, I really see it, Cleveland especially, as being a really urban street. We set back the building a foot, so we've got a 12-inch projection of those window bands. I think gives quite a nice subtle articulation. And I think the light wells and the roof and a cornice at the top kind of parapet, there's elements in there that are definitely articulated. But my minimalist and modernist architecture background is that this calm street front, understated and durable street front is way more important than overly articulating. I think there was one nice comment from Jenna about the yellow being too kitschy and too many colors. You know, there's a balance. So
I guess I'll just, from my perspective, I agree with that largely. I've never been a fan of kind of like the wedding cake standards, and especially with a new approach towards energy efficiency, I think it's something, until we get these better wall systems, that we've got to look at. So personally, when I look at this, I do kind of like the way it looks, and I do like the precedent imagery, and if that's the way the block hangs up, I think I would never have it.
I don't want to say that it's about the wedding cake or stepping back, you know, 6 feet or 15 feet. You can do it with colors. You can break up the window composition differently. Articulation isn't about actually offsetting, right? So I'm just black on black is reading as a box. I get the shadow lines. I'm just struggling with.
I think in real life, materials always read different. So in drawings, the guy has trouble with, you draw stuff on the computer and you print it and it doesn't look nearly close. Black on black is, I think, quite pretty when you see it in different materials. That cedar's going to weather differently. The metal's got a different sheen. It's quite a big effort and kind of cost to go to a reveal panel versus a solid flat black. The yellow, the matching window color and the railings, to me, there's quite a few layers in there that are going to give you articulation. It's not in the massing, it's not in massive block moves, but I think the big block moves, and we can't always do them all, but is the through block walkway and shuffling that laneway building. That's a really big financial and spatial commitment that I think is going to make the site more eclectic. So that laneway building with the roofscape and how it's kind of articulated and has different elevations to it, I think needs to be recognized. It's not just the front building.
I like the back building.
Yeah,
just
so
put that out there.
Look at it all.
I just think the frontage on Cleveland needs some work. I mean, we can argue it all day long, right?
Yeah.
But
I think that's important feedback, though. There's like targeted feedback for for option B to work with staff on that, because I think there's some really strong validity to that statement. So,
but there's a layer to it. Like we started with that being about energy, and that's, I would go this way whether it was energy or not, but if we really are, and this is the conversations I have outside of this project with planning and council directly, is if we're really serious about hitting these energy goals, we need to find ways to make it affordable and efficient to build these systems. And that's not just boxes, but it's understanding how these things go together and how they last 50, 100 years. So, big conversation.
I would like to speak to parking as, you know, being a problem but potentially a solution. There's a demographic shift and a technical shift going on with car share and that movement in general, and one thing you might not be familiar with is the idea of peer-to-peer car sharing. And in the future, the trend is shifting towards people being able to offset their cost of owning the vehicle with allowing somebody else the utility to use their vehicle. So as part of the solution for our first project, we proposed that, and we're now implementing that, where we're able to take alternative energy sources to power an electric vehicle, and statistically that gets 9 cars off the road. In other municipalities, people that do similar initiatives are granted like a 5-to-1 leniency for car stalls, and they look at small-scale development differently than they look at large-scale for this reason. And one of those reasons also ties in affordability and the idea of walkability and connectivity. So in these areas that are designed to be highly social, we think that this is part of the solution, not part of the problem. Thanks.
Thanks, Carrie.
I just wanted to add to the earlier comments that with voting for B, it goes back to staff and that we don't have to have an answer today to clarify, but you know, your comments and clarifications, as Carlos said, is helpful for what you meant by massing articulation, and we can bring that back and discuss that further. Is that what?
Yeah, of course.
Any other things I'd like to see added is it goes to massing is the rooftop variance and the elevator and parking.
Elevator size.
The size, yeah.
And with the rooftop, like what specifically?
Can we talk about the elevator? That's not in our mandate.
Technically you shouldn't, but we
Yeah,
always
no.
do. It's not about form and character, so. And I've acknowledged it's
just functionality. But
I've acknowledged that, that's it.
the rooftop goes to, I'm reading it here that it does not meet the massing guidelines on page 46.
Right, but I guess, so should we talk around that and the panels? Thoughts on it?
Is there a concern for?
Yeah, I just want, what is the concern, what's the?
Yeah. What's the concern?
Are you asking me directly?
Whoever, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's too heavy.
Right.
I'm not opposed to the height of it, it's dark, it's heavy,
You recognize that the inside of all the insets is either a combination of the yellow panel or whitewash cedar, which is in the material palette, so it's quite a light inset.
Do you have a rendering of that?
Well, the elevations show it, so you look in the top of the elevations, all this is either a combination of the yellow cement panel in the light wells, or these blocks, which is the elevator core and the staircase, the walls, are all in the whitewash cedar here, which is quite bright, and then when illuminated at night, I think it reads quite bright. You can see it up there a bit in the rendering, maybe it's a bit shadow. So the insets in general, the undercover carriages of the building are either yellow or cedar soffit, real cedar soffit, not painted metal, right? So there's some effort there, for sure.
I mean, the other thing is, it's like how I personally don't have any problem with the massing. So when do we do a vote to say, like, how much weight do we put behind the comment to work on the massing?
Well, at this point, it's a conversation that Carrie's listening to, and really, Carrie will take everyone's thoughts into consideration. So. I think
Yeah, and
that's
at the end of the day,
purpose
it's council's decision.
Yeah.
So, you know, by putting a report together with a table that says these don't comply, council has the ability to approve something that doesn't comply to those guidelines. It's just more of a discussion of.
But they do also look at our minutes if they're
Correct.
concerned to see
Correct.
what the comments were.
Yeah, so
and if massing is on there, then that's going to influence their decision.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, or it could. They
Carrie,
don't.
correct me if I'm wrong, your comments in your report of massing were directed more towards the rooftop extension, not as much the rest of the project.
Yeah, so our, you know, the purpose of staff putting in those comments is to spark discussion and, you know, share some of the things that staff are kind of weighing. At this time, you know, staff are supporting the variance in the form that it is due to the PV and the step code. So we like to covenant the property to ensure that it meets a higher step code in order to support that variance. But that's where we're going with that. But we do want to open that up to the panel to hear if they have any concerns around the massing component, which we are expecting to get some concerns around.
I tend to agree with Sarah. Well, to me, it's less about the actual roof because that's stepped back up there. My concern would be about on the fourth story, the top of the fourth story at the street front. That's going to appear to be rather high, but in the future, it might blend into what becomes a streetscape. So, you know.
I think so, and don't forget, I mean, there is this incentive to do the high. The building could be a story lower, but there's a push, and I think it's a good one, to have higher ground floor commercial for what this neighborhood could be. So that, it's always a trade system of what the community wants, what the district's trying to incentivize, which is a 50-50 split. The higher ground floor ceilings pushes us higher. And for me, it's important when you go higher is to match the proportion and balance it so we don't have this little half popping up. You know, I'd almost rather not have a rooftop deck, so. Yeah, I think they're all valid points. I mean, to me, it sounds like people have made their comments quite clear. I appreciate them all, take them into consideration, and I think we've had the dialogue for 6 months already about similar issues. So.
And then the only other comment was the zero line where it would block out that courtyard.
The light wells?
Yes, the light wells.
So that's something we've got on there.
That's on there, but I'll really have to leave it to you and Jonas that is a future consideration.
Yeah.
It's a bigger picture thing as well for what that becomes if a zero lot line building gets built next to it.
And like I said, with this, we will have a further discussion with the applicants around addressing these
I can see a
concerns.
really good solution, but that's beyond this meeting, so. And I'm sure Chris will get it anyway.
I have to say I like the massing in general. And when it comes to the green initiatives, I'd rather know that there's the funding in place to ensure that can happen, rather than spending money on things that would take away from it in general. Like that means, you know, the efficiency of the windows stacking on each other is going to allow for more opportunities for those green initiatives. I think for me that's more supportable. And with regards to the roof, I think my comments were pretty clear. It was just ensuring that the solar access was there with that heavy roof, but I've already kind of discussed that. But I just want to say that I support it in general.
Anyone else? Okay, and we're done. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And your dough is hilarious.
What?
The dough, it's very funny.
The dough. Everybody needs a bread shop. You don't want it to be a chain.
We're not like that.
I'm gonna add that hallway security piece. I was just going through the notes.
Yeah.
That was also some
Yeah.
there.
Good point. Always good.
The part they don't tell you is that Joe is actually a predatory loan operation. Joe Plus.
Is it?
Should we just do an admin thing that not everybody has a name tag?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Is that, they're all at the front, I left them at the front of the table.
You know, it's funny, this system, like I struggle with it all the time, that we have to go, we go around, I write all those comments, Sarah writes all those comments,
Yeah.
and then we have to remember them all
Yeah.
and then discuss them. I find it really difficult, and I've expressed that multiple times, but whatever those comments are, I usually, unless there's some conflict between them, we'll try to discuss those, but usually we'll try to work with the applicant to try to address them. So if we didn't say all of those pieces there,
Well, you
It's
being
still
here is
captured
half
in
the
the
battle
minutes,
too,
yeah.
so guys, we're not quite done yet.
I think it's also a learning moment without overly being exhaustive about repeating comments. I think if you're supportive of not supportive of something, it would be great if, kind of reflecting on this meeting, you should just quickly say, I'm also supportive of or not supportive, and then there's a better, quick understanding from your side to say, well, 3/4 of them actually weren't supportive, rather than assuming because we were quiet it meant X or Y. So it might be helpful for all of us to try and find a way to do that.
Yeah, and I apologize, Dennis, they're like calling on you, but I thought you had some really good comments, and so
Yeah,
I wanted to pull
absolutely.
more out of, because, you know, I'm not.
I know, but everybody has an opinion, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
then
definitely.
it becomes this, you know, debate about personal opinion.
Yeah.
I could argue Chris's philosophy for 3 hours,
Totally.
right? But I've got kids and I have to make dinner. Like,
No, I think you have a lot of great input, and so
I don't
it's
support
awesome
it.
to pull
The massing is
that
not
extra
there.
bit out of there, you know?
I know, but it's, yeah.
So sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay.
And I know from a planning perspective, like you often get this list of comments and well, this person, you know, one person said this, one person said that. How do you parse through to make a summary for council? And I think there can often be difficulty there. So it seems like everyone has a lot of good ideas, and it's worth exploring some of them a bit more, especially that like narrowing and articulation. Right? When I think articulation, I think building facade. I don't think color and treatment around windows. So it was super useful.
and this is maybe another point to take away for this group. The debate really should be between you guys and not the applicant.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that is maybe something the chair can help navigate a little bit. But I think it's good to have that clarification, and I appreciated Carlos asking, and I didn't want it intended to be a debate.
It's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Like
can
when
tell.
he's like, look at the elevation.
No,
It's
and
light.
everyone has different
Okay,
perspectives, so
right.
just something to
Yeah,
consider
but-
that it's between you guys that are debating, and it's okay if you guys have different opinions, and they're here to listen and to clarify. So if there's any, not justified all the time.
I think if
Yeah.
Chris hadn't been a prior ADP member, I probably would have cut it off.
Correct, yeah. And he's probably used to being in that debate, so I don't know.
He
So,
very
yeah.
much is. So he was assuming what he was used
Correct,
to.
yeah.
So something we do at the Public Art Committee is we have all the presentations, they leave the room and then we debate it, and they're out of the room when we debate it. So it's just, the debate is just amongst us and the discussion. I don't know if that's practical for this team, but it's just a suggestion.
I think it's really positive, because it's counter to that, like for the architecture, landscape architecture team and the proponent to be in the room while we're discussing this, because like I said, there's so many, we've got a very diverse background on ADP, I think, in this session, so there's a lot of various comments coming in, and they're not always just architectural, landscape architecture based. So it's good. I would encourage the continuous, just like if it's a discussion between us, let's make it between this side of the room, because I think it really benefits a lot of these projects.
We can also, to make it easier, excuse them from the table.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they make their presentation, they answer any questions we
Yeah,
have,
and
and then we
excuse
can
them.
have comments, and
So further
that immediately removes them from the discussion.
Yeah,
they
but
can still listen.
you were saying that there's value in having them here and overhear it. So there's a way that when we used to do the panel, it was very clear that I would get applicants and be like, can I speak? Am I able to? And it was more of an ask, and it was not. So that's something that planning can relay to these applicants, that that's not your time to speak unless there's a blatant, if you guys are talking about something and that's not correct, then it's definitely appropriate for them to ask to speak. And I think maybe for clarifications, but I think it is, to Carlos' point, it is important for them to hear that debate and to hear the different perspectives and not just, have to go on to the meeting minutes and hear it all. But to have some respectful distance between that. Yeah. So we can do a better job of relaying that, and I'll bring that to the team. Also just something for whoever is the chair or co-chair or doing that stuff, that you can feel free to step up and let's let Janice finish her review, her comment.
And just on that story,
I really have to.
Yeah.
Is that
Okay.
Can I be excused?
Yes.
We can have this conversation.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, so we'll call that roundtable discussion, and since items 5 and 6 are nil items on this agenda, that's okay. Anyone want to move to terminate?
Just before,
Second?
quick question, before we terminate, sorry. When is our next meeting? So we know that we have quorum, at least we can then put it into our calendars and know that.
We get an email.
Thursday. The third Thursday.
It's
Third
Thursday.
Thursday.
Third Thursday.
I've ever met.
Okay, who's moving the termination? Second? Everyone in favor?
Thank you.